Well, good morning and welcome everyone to this meeting of the NHS Devon Integrated Care Board. We are meeting in public rather than it being a fully open public meeting, but I'd particularly like to welcome everyone who's attended from the Seton Hospital Steering Group and the Friends of the League of Friends. So thank you very much and welcome. I'd also like to just extend some apologies for absence before we kick off from Ruth Harrell, from Paul Renshaw and from Tandy Hara. Donna Manson will be delayed on another meeting but joining us shortly, and we have a number of members who are joining this meeting online. So welcome to Bill Shields, Kirsty Denwood, Judy Hargaden, Hisham Khalil, Sheena Asthana and Kate Shields who are online. So thank you everyone. Could I just confirm that we're quorate today? We are, thank you very much. And I'd also like to welcome to her first public board meeting Penny Smith, our Interim Chief Nursing Officer, and Alison Williams, who joins us as System Improvement Director. So very welcome to all of you. Now, unusually, given the strength of feeling that I have received a petition from the Seton Hospital campaigners. That's a physical petition, and together with 2 online petitions raising over 9,000 signatures. And because of that, what I'm going to do is change the order of the meeting so that we can allow those campaigners to present their questions at the beginning of the board meeting and receive some answers. I'd also like to assure you that your petition will be formally noted and minuted, and it will be presented also in the board meeting, next public meeting in February. I would like to also thank those who came yesterday. We had a very constructive meeting with members of the team, and we've got a clear action plan and way forward, and we look forward to keeping in touch over the coming months. So thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over now to Matthew Chetwynd, who's going to present the questions that we've received and the answers, and then I believe we're going to have a short payments too. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Matt.
Thank you. So we received a number of questions, and these are going to be the answers that we wish to articulate. Were the Finance Committee and board members informed before their meetings in September and October respectively that Seton Hospital was established on the initiative and part funded by the League of Friends on the understanding that the building would be run as an NHS hospital and that the building of the wing in question was paid for 100% by the public donations? And in our response, and there are 2 parts to this question, the Finance and Performance Committee, who made the decision about handing back the ward under delegated authority from the full board, was made aware that the proposed disposal would likely be met with high levels of community concern and with disappointment. The papers also confirmed that the community had raised money towards the cost of the hospital. Members were also informed that the building now belongs to NHS Property Services Limited. And then the second part to the question, does the board now accept that, in light of these considerations, it should have consulted with Seton stakeholders before making this decision? We understand why local people are concerned about the idea of losing a ward building that they funded. It was always the intention of the ICB, as set out in the Supporting Communications and Engagement Plan, to engage with the local community about this decision. However, we would not normally formally consult on a decision about this nature because no services are being affected. NHS Devon's duty is to commission services, and it doesn't own the building. Responsibility for the future of the space handed back to NHS Property Services by other parts of the NHS sits with NHSPS and not with NHS Devon. It's also important to note that the ward has been stood empty for 6 years. We engaged with local stakeholders during the summer and no viable options were found. The Supporting Communications Plan clearly sets out this process for engaging with local people, and we do continue to engage with the community, and as Sarah said, we held a constructive meeting with the steering group representatives yesterday, and hopefully we can find some way forward. Second question. Does the board now accept that it was mistaken to quote the 2016-17 consultation on the withdrawal of the beds in justification of its recent decision? First, the consultation did not concern the future of the ward space. Second, it showed that Seton residents were overwhelmingly opposed to the withdrawal, and the last-minute switch of the Seton beds to Sidmouth without proper justification discredited the outcome in the eyes of the local community. And in our response, Information on the 2016-17 Your Future Care consultation is provided as background on the governance process that it has been followed. That's not justification. During this consultation, the CCG, our predecessor organisation, it consulted on the services. Commissioning services is our responsibility. We're not responsible for consulting on the future of buildings that we don't own them. In this case, further public involvement on the future of the site would be the responsibility of the building owner, and that's NHS Property Services Limited. The reason for this work is to reduce the amount of money we spend on empty buildings, and that's driven by our severe financial challenges. Third question. Will the board agree to the request of the Devon Health and Adult Care Scrutiny Committee, which is OSC, that the proposed disposal is not implemented until they've explored and discussed the long-term future provision of NHS health and wellbeing services for Seaton and Collerton residents, and reported on this to the Scrutiny Committee as it has requested in January 2024? And our response: the decision to hand back the space was in effect taken by the board under powers delegated to the Finance and Performance Committee in September 2023 before the OSC meeting. That decision still stands and the work on the handback still continues. We're currently talking to NHS Property Services about this handback process, and as part of that period of negotiation that will continue. Although, if a viable solution did come forward, we'd be interested to hear about it from respective parties. Given the time that has elapsed since these discussions with local partners began, at this stage we need to make sure conversations are happening with NHS Property Services as the owner of the building and the organisation for deciding what to do with that space that we are handing back. Unless there are any further questions, I believe that was the one that was submitted to us.
Well, those were the questions that we submitted. I don't know if are you going to make any further statement on behalf of the board, or shall I say one or two words in response to what?
Sure, I'd be delighted if you wanted to ask any further questions or make the statement that we discussed, and then I'll just make a few closing comments afterwards, if that's all right.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair. I think the answers which are given are disappointing to us, really, because we have been extremely frustrated by the Devon NHS's decision-making on the hospital, not just in the last few months, but indeed over the last 7 years. And I don't think that the board has fully acknowledged the extent of the failures, really. The fact that the part of this hospital has been empty for 6 years is down to NHS Devon, which has left it empty, which has not taken opportunities to find other uses for the hospital, even during the pandemic. So and we are disappointed that you are continuing with the handback of the wing in question to the Property Services Company. Having said that, we recognise the extreme financial situation which you're in, and we don't want to see this ward empty. We want this ward of this hospital to be used for health and wellbeing services for the local community, as was always intended as part of our agreement with the NHS. And I was somewhat heartened by our discussions yesterday, the fact that you, Sarah, and the other board members present accepted. I think although you don't have a legal responsibility for the future of the building, I think you were accepting a degree of moral responsibility, which comes from the history of our agreement, the Seaton League of Friends agreement with the NHS in Devon several decades ago, and through our commitment to the hospital in the millions of pounds which we have raised for the hospital over the years, and to support NHS services. So I was heartened by the fact that you offered to work with us to discuss these issues with NHS Property Services and to try and find a solution that will be acceptable to the local community and will work with the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for coming today and for meeting yesterday. And as you say, it was a very constructive meeting where I think there is genuinely a recognition that the current status quo can't continue with us spending almost £300,000 a year just on an empty ward. And just to reiterate, we're not closing any services. This is a ward that's been empty now for 6 years, but we do recognise all the sentiments that you've expressed around the strength of feeling, the historical background of these buildings being so heavily funded by the local community over generations. And so we will definitely be working with you over the coming months as we negotiate with NHS Property Services to try and ensure that we can have some community benefit for local residents from this building. And as I say, it's just from this ward within the building. We're not talking about closing the rest of the building, but within this space so that it can be used for community benefit. And I'd like to thank all those voluntary sector organisations that currently do so from that space. So thank you very much from the building, rather. Thank you. I should say that you are all very welcome to stay for the whole meeting. During this meeting, we'll be setting out the scale of our financial challenge, because we do meet in the context of us having to make £212 million of savings this year. So if any members are interested in staying for the whole meeting, you're most welcome, but we do understand that you may have other commitments. So I will leave that to your discretion. I don't know whether you would want to leave now or stay for the meeting.
Personally, I would like to leave now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, understood. Thank you very much for coming today. I'll just give a few moments for our visitors to leave. Thank you. Right, I think we will move on with the rest of the meeting, and I'm going to start by asking if there are any changes to the declarations of interest that we have expressed online. Nope. Thank you. And now to move on to the minutes of the meeting, and this is for approval, please. And it's been highlighted that the funding formula had been contentious for some time, with some members of the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority, ACRA, contending that it may be responsible for a systematic pattern of overspend across the county due to unintended consequences. But I think that's something I don't think we need to necessarily change. That's
No, we're proposing that we remove that.
We remove it. I'm sorry. Okay, we remove that from the minutes. Right, are there any comments on that? Nope. Thank you. Right, so we'll move on, and we're coming now to the section of our meeting which is the citizen story, and today we're going to hear about how that applies to our local communities through the Care Coordination Hub. And I'd like to hand over to James Wenman, the Associate Director for Urgent Care, who's going to join us to lead this part of the discussion. Thank you very much, James.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here and to be able to talk about a very exciting piece of work that we are leading in Devon, which we've called Care Coordination. If I may start just by giving a little bit of background about myself. So, as Sarah said, I'm James Wenman, Associate Director for Urgent Care. I like to think I understand a little bit about the benefits and the profound implications of not getting this right first time. Having worked in the ambulance sector for 20 years clinically and operationally, I've seen firsthand why it's so important that patients receive the right care by the right people at the first occasion, and the profound implications on the wider NHS if we get that wrong first time. So the care coordination concept is one that's been developed and piloted across the country. There are a number of pilot sites, East of England, Baines, Swindon and Wiltshire, to name two. Recognising the pressure that we are under within Devon and being a Tier 1 system, NHSCI colleagues have said that it would be prudent for us to look at how we could adopt a care coordination model within Devon, and we immediately recognised some of those benefits, whilst recognising that lifting and shifting models from elsewhere wouldn't necessarily be the most appropriate way forward. I feel like we have landed on a really good solution, and we're only just scratching the surface in terms of its full potential. So the Care Coordination Hub itself is a collaboration of both NHS acute trusts, the ambulance sector, community, mental health, voluntary sector, and commissioning partners, of course. And the overall aim of the Care Coordination Hub is to intervene much earlier in the patient's journey to enable us to support healthcare professionals within the community to direct their patients in the most appropriate way, where possible, avoiding inappropriate services such as the ED department or leaning on primary care if it's not absolutely necessary. The proof of concept that we've operated in Devon focused predominantly on supporting the ambulance sector in the first instance. So we have been supporting paramedics both on scene and looking at the queues that the ambulance service hold to try and intervene earlier without the need then to dispatch an ambulance moving forward. We've run a 2-week pilot between the 30th of October and the 12th of November, and we based that in our most challenged area in our west locality. And we did that in collaboration with Live Well South West, University Hospitals Plymouth, and other system partners, co-locating in a site in West Devon. During that period, we reviewed and supported 220 cases over the 2-week proof of concept. 165 of those were supported to avoid an emergency ED attendance. And of those, 101 ambulances dispatches were avoided, 64 ambulances conveyances to hospital were avoided. We used alternative support that was provided by both primary care, district nurses, other urgent care services, mental health services, and 44% of the cases were closed in the hub with advice only. 55 of the cases, however, were appropriate for the ED and were unable to be closed from the point of contact. And I think whilst it's really exciting for me to understand how we better utilise the excellent services that we have in Devon, I'm also really interested to understand where the gaps are, because I think that is equally as important to help us identify where we may need to modify either existing services or develop new services to try and meet the patient's needs. Being in the hub was quite a humbling experience. It was an opportunity. I think we're quite quickly wrapped up in much of the strategic work, and it was a great opportunity for me to be able to place myself back into a really energised room full of like-minded people that were really pushing for the best interests of their patients. We saw clinicians from across Devon, whether they were advanced care practitioners, primary care practitioners. We had acute hospital medics working the room, and they all approached it in a slightly different way, but all added huge value. The ACPs and GPs were able to deal with much of the lower acuity work quite quickly. The acute trust clinicians were able to lean on their existing enduring relationships and networks within the hospitals to really open up new pathways of care. And I think it's important that we recognise in Devon that a lot of the low-lying fruit has been picked. We know our ambulance service has excellent hear and treat rates. They treat many of their patients over the phone. They have even better see and treat rates, so many of their patients are treated on scene. We've got a good directory of services. So really, this for us was understanding what more could we do, and watching particularly the acute clinicians open access to ophthalmology, to MAU, to surgical SDEC. That's enabled us to I suppose, build new pathways and understand better where are those opportunities, recognising that we need to be incredibly efficient and effective in Devon if we're going to meet the challenges that face us. There's a number of stories here. I think one that I did want to pick out, because I know that end of life is a great opportunity for us in Devon in terms of better supporting those patients and their families. We had a patient present that was agitated towards the end of life, and speaking to the ambulance crew, that would ordinarily be a hospital admission for them. It was out of hours. That patient then would, I imagine, spend some time in an ambulance queue, some time in an ED department, and that is the last place anyone would want to be, nor would any of us want them to be at the end stages of life. Through the hub and through virtual access to first contact mental health services, we were able to find out of hours, which was remarkable, symptom control medicines, so just in case medicines, to be able to treat that patient's symptoms and enable them to remain at home with their family, which was a huge win for everyone, I think, involved in that case. This graph demonstrates the impact, I think, of having having different types of clinicians in the room, and you'll recognise the effectiveness of the hub was largely better, or more effective, should I say, when we had clinicians, senior decision makers within that space. This is a real challenge for us in Devon. I think I'm hugely grateful to all of our partners that have supported this programme of work so far. We've had to redeploy staff from our acute trusts, from clinical and non-clinical roles within the community, just to be able to test what is the art of the possible. And we are now able to shape what that model would look like on a more sustainable footing. Finding the staff, I think, is still going to be a challenge, and I'm hoping that it will be incredibly difficult to argue against this model when we describe it back after a longer period of testing. That it is important that where we can redeploy staff, that we do that, because the benefits will be so profound. In terms of the outcomes, we took 2 days where we felt we were the best resourced. So this is where we had a full cadre of, in terms of our MDT, and we extrapolated that data out. I feel this is quite conservative, and again, I think with more time we will be able to demonstrate even greater impact. But I think the overarching take-homes for me was around 60% of the cases that the hub interacts with, it avoids an ED admission. Only 2 of the 36 out of the 60 that we tested were then represented to hospital, and I think that is an acceptable number, recognising that patients' symptoms will change. Unfortunately, they will deteriorate, and they will need the services of an emergency department. We're estimating at the moment projected bed savings of around 29 days, but again, that is the most conservative figure of the modelling assumptions that we've worked through so far. So there are other modelling that suggests a much greater return on investment in terms of bed savings in that respect. So in terms of the timeline and next step, just to finish, we're moving from a proof of concept now into a more sustainable delivery model. Christmas and New Year is going to be a challenge in terms of staffing our rotas. We are working incredibly closely, as you would imagine, with our chief operating colleagues and chief execs within all of the acute trusts, and unanimously they all support this project moving forward, and are all working incredibly hard to try and release staff or recruit staff to support this project moving forward. So I am optimistic that whilst we might find a challenging period through the festivities, we certainly will be well placed within the new year to hit the ground running with our more sustainable offer. We are looking at scaling the project because, of course, a lot of the focus has been on West Devon, whilst we've had clinicians from other areas work in the hub and have been looking at how they could support their own respective areas. We do need to scale this at pace so that we can understand, again, the potential on a Devon scale. We're looking to lift the hub element out of the Western locality and place it within our IUCS provider, recognising that close alignment to the 999 queue and the 111 out of hours queue is imperative if we're going to be highly effective, so that there is an implementation plan to understand how we do that. There is also plans in place to understand how we develop our spokes, because the hub is one element of this model and will only be successful, I believe, if the spokes are highly effective also. So by the spokes, I mean those local services, local pathways that exist currently that could be better coordinated, better accessed, if we are able to organise those differently and enable a close alignment between the hub and the spoke itself. Reporting, we are keen to obviously demonstrate the impact, and when we move to a Devon model, we'll have greater reporting capabilities, so we'll be able to play that back to the system. And as I've mentioned previously, the senior clinical rota deficit, the Devon Urgent Care Board is meeting this afternoon, and it will be discussed at that meeting the need to reinforce that rota moving through the festive periods and into the new year.
Thank you very much. And can I ask if there are any questions or comments? Anthony, did you want to come in here? Thank you.
think first, a huge thanks to you and the team for starting something that has massive potential to change how we're delivering care, but also to cut through the layers of urgent and emergency care which we have. And I think it's important that we realise this isn't just a bolt-on, this is actually a fundamentally different way of doing things. That being said, I'm very conscious that we have a number of existing services already, and I just wondered if you'd been able to look at any of our existing services and look at any opportunities there for doing things differently with those services as well.
Yeah, good question, Anthony. So I think we recognise in Devon that there are 3 very distinct localities that have very different nuances in terms of how we access pathways. Some of the language we use is different, some of the ways in which we access those services are different. Virtual wards is a great example of that. So up until care coordination, it was only really senior medics that were able to access virtual wards. Through care coordination and that collaboration, having those medics in the room and being able to liaise directly with paramedics on the scene, we were able to open access to virtual wards for paramedics directly from scene, which is something that we've not been able to do before. Similarly with same-day emergency care, so SDEC, as it's affectionately known, is another area in which we have differences across Devon in terms of accessibility, capability and capacity, and being able to access those services and understand better that within the same-day emergency care area is enabled us to flow patients through that service more effectively also.
Thank you. We're going to bring in Liz Davenport next. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, James. And I would add, I think that's an excellent presentation. And from a provider perspective, we really welcome this development. We think it's a really, really positive opportunity to help us better understand need outside of hospital and make sure that we can support people to get the right care first time. And I think this is a really great opportunity to do that and to optimise, as Anthony says, some of those alternative pathways which we've seen develop with its virtual ward, same-day emergency care and other pathways. My comment is more about workforce. I think we have an opportunity here clearly to make sure that we have the right decision-making capability in the hub, but also a plea that we look at the wider multidisciplinary opportunities we have available to us so that we're able to build resilience into that workforce model going forward, because we're very keen to see this be embedded and deliver the impacts on a more broader scale than those described here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. So we have been naturally casting our net quite wide. I think it's important that we have the right clinicians in the room, but we've seen huge value added from nurses, from ACPs, our advanced care practitioner cohorts, from paramedics in the room. We've got specialist paramedics there also, as well as a range of doctors or medics from different backgrounds. So I think out of necessity as well as need, we're going to have to look quite far and wide for that resource. What I want to avoid doing is placing the wrong people in the hub, because a wrong clinician is better than no clinician. I think it's important, having seen how they operate, that the real value is in having clinicians in the room that are able to broker those relationships and unlock some of those pathways, and placing a remote clinician from somewhere in the Midlands, for example, that we know some of our models are based on, is not particularly helpful because they don't have that added value.
Thank you. I've got a number of colleagues who'd like to come in. I'm going to take Penny Smith next, Chief Nursing Officer.
Thanks, James. My point was very much around workforce and making sure we're not denuding other critical services, but also building it into our workforce planning going forward, recognising that key clinical skill set, but what an opportunity to look at workforce transformation in real time. So amazing stuff. The one point, a particular point, this is a citizen's story. So what's been your feedback from people who have used the service? Because I'm really keen that return on investment has measures other than length of stay, but impact clinically and for people's experience.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. So of those that we have spoken to, we have been careful to collect patient feedback. They have found the service hugely beneficial in terms of when they first thought they would need an ED admission, to be told that they don't need one is quite impactful, particularly out of hours, particularly with some of the cases that we've seen, the quite sensitive cases, particularly around end-of-life palliative care, mental health. Clearly there is huge benefits for the patients, their families, and the wider health service. I think also what's been really reassuring is the feedback from the clinicians in the service as well. So everyone that has taken part has fed back. We did a trust pilot rating, almost, would you stay in this hotel if it was referred to you kind of rating, and through the proof of concept, we were rated 9.75 as a service to use. So we took that with great pleasure. I think that having that collaborative approach and having sort of your peers around you to make those difficult decisions, because we need to recognise that we're in a different place in Devon in terms of the risk that we are holding on a day-to-day basis. So we need to be mindful of the context of risk when we are making decisions, so that, of course, we make the right decisions, that we take proportionate risks, but also that the patients get safe and effective care. And being able to lean on colleagues that are in the same room, albeit whether they are your peers or your seniors, has proved to be hugely empowering for the clinicians that have worked in there. And a greater understanding as well of what risk each organisation holds, and the type of activity that they hold also has been really empowering.
Thank you very much. Sheena Asthana's waiting online, and then I'm going to come to Nigel Aitchison. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you. This is really brilliant work, and it's great to hear it in a little bit more detail. Just a couple of questions, which I think you've already started to talk about, but one of which is you talked about the risks of lift and shift, and assuming that similar models work okay in different places. It's just sort of some reassurance that as you roll out your Devon-wide infrastructure, you are sensitive to differences between localities, and particularly between different case mixes. Plymouth, I know you mentioned a couple of older patients, but it is a younger demography than the other ones, and I think presents different challenges in terms of the mix of, e.g., highly complex needs versus frailty, etc. So it's just a sort of plea for a bit of place sensitivity. But the one I really wanted to talk about was something that everybody else has been raising, which is the workforce issue. And trying to unpick the role of the senior clinician. I suspect that in several of the cases, it's not necessarily a complex clinical need that we're looking at, but we may be looking at a kind of a culture of hierarchy where you have to be at a certain level in order to be able to broker those relationships and make those decisions. And given the deficit that we have with regard to senior clinicians, I'm wondering if there may be other opportunities for kind of challenging that culture, skilling up different parts of the workforce to be empowered and to feel empowered and trusted to make those sorts of decisions, whether or not that might be an alternative given the difficulties you have with your clinical rota.
You make two really good observations there. I think on the latter point, I think that having a multidisciplinary team work in the way that it has enabled a greater understanding of the capabilities of clinical colleagues, and that in itself we've talked a lot about trusted assessor. Rather than having a hierarchical model, we've talked a lot about trusted assessor. So that trusted assessor that may be trusted to refer patients, assess patients, and then refer them into certain services doesn't ordinarily need to be a senior doctor. I think we've seen a greater degree of understanding and professional courtesy applied within that team to enable them to access those pathways. And I think once we make good decisions once, we're then almost empowered to make good decisions again and again and again. And I think that's been really empowering to see those clinicians identify, particularly paramedics and other HCPs, other allied healthcare professionals, identify patients that they think are suitable for things like virtual wards or for SDEC, and have a cursory conversation then with a doctor around whether or not they would agree. And more often than not, the case is they do agree. And I'm sure it won't be long before those trusted assessors are referring those patients directly without the need of senior clinical input. But we are very sensitive to some of the existing protocols and consider those. And just on your primary point, the spoke work will be led by the localities. I'm confident that they will understand those local nuances, their own demographic, and build services that meet the needs of their local population. And then the hub element will enable a sort and sieve type model to allow us to drop some of those more complex patients into those more nuanced services where they will need a more localised response.
Thank you. I'm going to come now to Nigel Aitchison, our Chief Medical Officer.
James, thank you very much indeed for the presentation, and to all of the colleagues who've contributed to this. I think there are a couple of things. One of them is, I think that it's founded on a lot of work that you and others have done around this table in building relationships right across the health and care system, and indeed with the voluntary sector. And that is one of the things I think is an opportunity here. To, as Sheena said, what are the local assets around individuals that we can bring to bear to help people at times when they're approaching a crisis of some sort or other. So looking forward, one of the roles of an ICB is to work out how we make that VCSE, local authority and health kind of continuum work to best effect for colleagues. So really, really pleased to see this is starting. But the other thing I wanted to do was just thank colleagues in Livewell who I've spent some time with for their agility and their kind of willingness to look outward in the way that they did in order to support us setting this up pretty rapidly and so effectively. So just wanted to make that point about them in support of the work that you and colleagues have done.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Frank O'Kelly, our partner member for primary care.
Thank you. James, I think this is great, largely because it's about getting the patients to the right place at the right time. But I think there's a few things I'd like to say. One, the main skill of people working in the community is managing risk. And this is all about managing risk. And so as a board, we have to accept that if we're going to put people in a position where we're asking them to use alternatives, that we support them when those alternatives are used. If we don't, what happens is people can't manage the risk at the right level, and then they send people into hospital. And most of medicine is about limiting risk. So it is a different culture we've got to think about. The other thing is clearly articulating where the benefits of this are, because I already know that in terms of ambulance transfers, we have the highest see and treat in the country, and we have the lowest transfers in the country. So we already have 60% of cases taken out when the ambulances arrive. So there will be a huge benefit in a lot of those ambulances not having to go out. But it's thinking about what outcomes and outputs we're going to measure, because you could almost argue that it's not that different, but there will be many more ambulances available, so therefore it will be different. And I think that's it, really. It's what outcomes are we going to be measuring to prove the concept, and also it's a thing about culture and risk and managing things in the community.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. You're right, and I've been really keen to ensure that we don't double count, we don't overpromise, underdeliver. I'm acutely aware of the excellent work that the ambulance sector provides for us in terms of reducing demand on our ED departments, and I'm also mindful that by shifting resource, we're not shifting the performance, if that makes sense. So, by placing clinicians in our hub, are we just getting to patients earlier than perhaps the SWAS clinicians, the ambulance service clinicians, might do in their hub, and therefore have the same outcome. So we're really keen and working through, whether it's through end-to-end reviews, whether it's through questionnaires with paramedic colleagues to understand, did the care coordination hub make a difference in that without it, would you have ended up conveying this patient to the ED department? But also, had that conversation taken place with their own GP, because we know we have access HCP lines to primary care colleagues as well, would the same outcome have been had they contacted the hub? So you're right, it's really important and I'm always cautious not to describe something that could be the panacea if it's not going to provide that impact. And to do that, we need to make sure through rigour and robust audit that we're able to really pick out the additionality that this is offering, because it's not an inexpensive model, and it may be at the cost of something else. So yeah, absolutely.
May I just ask a follow-up point to that? Because before this was set up, I spent some time with some paramedic crews, and one of the issues that they identified as a problem was the amount of time they spend on site getting through to those partners that they want to mobilise an alternative resource for. Are you also tracking whether you're shortening the time on site for paramedic colleagues?
Yes, that's one of our KPIs, Sarah. So you're right. So accessing services can be quite time consuming, particularly if those services are busy or are with patients and they have a skeleton workforce. So a great example is perhaps trying to refer a falls patient into our urgent crisis response team. Ordinarily that could take up to an hour. The ability of the hub is to be agile enough to take the responsibility for that patient, release the crew from scene so that they can go and respond to another call, and then deal with that referral without the need then to redeploy an ambulance, because there is confidence in the system that we can deploy the right resource and there is capacity. Because they're co-located with UCR teams, we can stand up and reach over a computer and say, have you got capacity? They say, yes, we've got capacity. Release the crew, make the referral and free up some of that time.
That's really encouraging in managing the risk we currently have with people who can't get access to an ambulance at all. So thank you very much, James, to you and your team. Now, I've got Hisham Khalil, who's been waiting patiently online. Then I'm going to come to Alison Williams. So Hisham.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, James, for a great presentation and a great piece of work. My comment or question relates to evidence-based practice in workforce development and also making use of the expertise in our partner trusts and universities as well. I'm referring to using immersion environments and in situ simulation for the training of the multidisciplinary team to enhance the quality of patient care and patient experience. Now, that's something that we do in the individual trusts, and there's quite a lot of work in the two universities in the region about this as well. So just wondered about your thoughts about that. Thank you.
It's interesting, Hisham. So we have had conversations since the inception of care coordination to understand what type of workforce we would want to operate. And that conversation has gone as far as working with academic partners to create training programs for urgent care practitioners that could operate in a peripatetic way to provide support across a multitude of different clinical settings, recognising that, particularly in escalation in Devon, as a system, we don't have clinicians that can easily move between one organisation and the other. So if we're able to design a training programme, and we've been working with colleagues I think it's within Northampton, who have been able to develop something similar. If we're able to emulate that, then we could begin to develop a programme and a workforce plan that enables us to create the right type of clinician that can operate in this setting, but also provide further support across the wider healthcare sector within Devon, or certainly within our localities. But I certainly would be keen to explore that further. If that's with yourself, then that would be great. Or if you could signpost me to someone that I could link in with, then I would also appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Alison Williams, our Improvement Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well done. I know it's been really difficult to get this off the ground, and I just wanted to make two sort of brief points, if I may. I think the first one is that there is a significant cost. You're talking between 2 and 3 million investment in this development. It's funded through winter monies for this year, so it will be really important that the evaluation of the proof of concept comes to the Finance and Performance Committee before the end of the financial year, so a decision can be made about its continuation. I'd be very confident that, from some of the early data and elsewhere, that will enable there to be an ongoing support for this, but also recognition that may result in disinvestment in services that may be duplicated elsewhere in the system, because what this does is really give an opportunity to test that all of those services that are currently in the out-of-hospital space are truly working in sync with one another. So this is a real opportunity. And then I think the other potential is how the voluntary sector services and the directory of services that everybody works so hard to put in place becomes very live and real. Because as the confidence grows in the expertise of the people within the hub, one of the collateral benefits will be their understanding and better understanding of what the voluntary sector can offer in terms of support, which is very difficult when you've got a very dispersed workforce, for everybody to understand the potential that that offers. At the end of the day, when patients ask for help, they need a service. They don't often mind what service they get, they just want help. And this is about really giving them the help that they need, as opposed to the help that they think that they want. But that evaluation, I think, will be critical for the ongoing funding of this, James. And it may be that we need to get some help to make sure that that is robust.
Yeah, I agree. I would expect nothing less from you, Alison. So, would want to absolutely ensure that we excel the virtues, but also highlight some of the risks and of course, clearly articulate the costings. I think just on the VSC opportunity, with being able to deploy a voluntary sector in to support something simple like night sits. So, recognising out of hours that a patient is in need of some support, but doesn't necessarily need to go to the ED. But being able to deploy someone from the voluntary sector to sit with them overnight so they can access services in hours, that is invaluable and something that we're not particularly exploiting today. So those avenues need to be explored if we're going to be as effective and as efficient as we need to be.
Thank you both very much. Now, I'm conscious that time's pressing on, so I'm going to take two more questions and then we're going to need to move on. I'm going to come to Sarah Lou Glover first, our partner member for mental health.
Hi, James. Firstly, I'm really excited and it's great to see the innovation. I am concerned about the longevity, especially knowing it's winter precious money. So really want you to think about how you can make sure that those outcomes ensure that this can continue. One of the things I'd be really interested to hear about is the mental health patients and what is their knock-on effect of not going into hospital, because for some people that can be seen as a place of safety, regardless of whether it's the right place or not. So I would be interested if as part of the measure to see what is happening longer term with those patients. Is it resulting in something better for them, or are they starting to bounce around the system even more than they were? So there's something about that, and are we linking into the Mental Health Alliance work with that? What age group are we looking at? So what is the lowest age group at the moment, and are we thinking about going lower with that? And are the VCSE Assembly involved? Absolutely, as Alison said, the VCSE can bring a huge amount of support to this, and actually by involving the Assembly, you're more likely to be able to include more voices and understand what's available.
So I'll try and take one of those in turn. So the mental health, I think I agree, it would be helpful to, even as a subsection of the evaluation, just to understand in detail the longer term impact on those individuals. We've worked really closely with DPT and LiveWell, as you would expect, throughout this pilot, and have had them in the room. We've also been able to open up access to advice lines, virtual or otherwise, to support the hub, and that's proven to be hugely effective. We've got the mental health desk in SWAS that we've been linking in, and the first response services within the county. So I'm confident that we have met the needs so far of some of those patients that have presented to us. I think, again, it would be helpful, like you said, to understand the longer-term impact, because self-presenting within 2 days perhaps is unusual for a mental health patient, but self-presenting within a week or 2 weeks. It might not be. So we can certainly look at that. The VCSE is something that we've done informally. I think approaching the Assembly now that we're landed on a model and we're developing our implementation plan in terms of how they could support and assist us would also be invaluable. So I'll take that away and make sure that we do that.
Thank you. We'll record that as an action then. So thank you very much for that, James. Now, I did have an indication that Kate Shields online might have a question, but she may have some connection problems at the moment. Kate? Oh, hello, Kate.
I haven't.
Thank you.
I haven't. I just didn't know whether you had time for me.
Yes.
So I just wanted to offer some support, really, because we're addressing exactly the same issues in Cornwall. And that maybe in terms of us looking at evaluation, there might be some merit of us evaluating the same things. So we definitely want to look at reduced occupied bed days associated with non-elective admission, particularly for people who have fallen, are frail, or who are at end of life. And I think our population is generally similar to the Devon population, so there might be helpful metrics. We've already had a full service in place for over a year, and less than 20% of our falls are now conveyed to ED, and we don't see the implications of long lies, so pressure sores or acute kidney injury, and people are kept safe and well in their own homes. So in terms of some early evidence to offer into this model, I think it's really helpful. And just on the training aspect, we're doing some work with Lancaster University with their rural and remote medicine service with the Isles of Scilly to look how we would absolutely maximise the use of technology so that everything is digitised. And as that work comes through, which will happen over the next year, it could be something that we might want to look at across Devon and Cornwall, because we have little island populations that haven't got water around them, but they're so remote they function as an island would. So just happy to link up with that. And if you could give us who your contact is, we could work together perhaps over the winter and going into next year.
Thank you, Kate. We've stayed quite close to your team in Cornwall, because clearly there are some mutual benefits in collaborating across the border to try and support patients that may present in Cornwall and then be conveyed into West Devon. And we have regular meetings with the commissioning team and your clinical leads to understand what the art of the possible is within that space. So yeah, thank you, and I'll perhaps contact you outside of the meeting with a link for that work. That would be great.
Fantastic, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, James, for a fantastic presentation. And you can hear from the number of questions that we've had, the huge interest there is in this area. So we look forward to a progress report at a future board. So thank you very much to you and all your team.
Well, welcome. Look forward to coming back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, we're going to move on now to the leadership section of our board meeting, and starting with our Chief Executive's report. So over to you, Bill Shields.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I will take the report largely as read. A number of things just to focus on, and these build on the discussions that we've had both in board and in other forums. So in terms of the focus now and going forward, it's really about the short and medium term changes that will tackle the performance and financial pressures that we see now and in the future in Devon. As a system, as we've discussed at the board in the past, we remain in the highest segment, which is segment 4 of the NHS National Oversight Framework, so that's known as NOF 4, and that means that we get intensive support from NHS England, and that's why we have Alison Williams as our Improvement Director, and she now attends all of our board meetings as well as our executive and executive committee team meetings. Our system continues to forecast a deficit for the current year of £42.3 million, and currently we are not on track to deliver that. And that has led to a number of conversations and discussions that we've had with NHS England, both regionally and nationally. And those discussions will continue for the remainder of this year. And I know that Kirsty Denwood will be describing our current financial performance later in this meeting, and that will also pick up the discussion and the dialogue that we continue to have with NHS England. NHSC has made it very clear that we need to increase our focus on achieving the criteria for exit from North 4. And in the short term, we'll be refocusing and reprioritising our work, our efforts, and some of our resources and staff. And this is something that we've discussed at length as an executive, looking at how we redeploy and refocus those staff to ensure that we can provide safe, timely and affordable care, as well as focusing on the long-term priorities that we are keen to continue to work on. We've made excellent progress in reducing the number of people waiting more than 2 years for care, and Anthony Fitzgerald will cover that when he talks about our position in terms of the performance that we currently are delivering on. But we have much more to do, particularly when it comes to the performance on urgent and emergency care. And we're currently taking a different approach to that in terms of how we work with our unscheduled care board in the system, and also the senior responsible officer appointment that we have with Anne James, the Chief Executive from University Hospitals Plymouth, and she will be leading on urgent and emergency care across the system in the winter and beyond. Turning to the appointment of Chief Executive Officer, we're pleased that Steve Moore will be joining the organisation as the new Chief Executive Officer on the 13th of November 2023, which will allow me to step back to my substantive role as Deputy Chief Executive and Chief Finance Officer. And also, I'd like to welcome, and I know you've already done this, Chair, Penny Smith as our Interim Chief Nursing Officer, and she has joined the team on the 1st of December. She has extensive experience across the South West in NHS England South West, and she is a very valuable addition to the team now and going forward. As board members will be aware, we are in the process of making efficiency savings, which were notified to us by the Secretary of State some time ago, and that requires a 20% reduction in 2024-25 and a further 10% reduction in 2025-26. Our Phase 1 structure for executive and senior leadership team has now been finalised, and we're currently in the implementation process. More challenging Phase 2 will begin in the new year, and that will require us to fundamentally rethink the purpose of the organisation and consider all areas where savings can be made. It will also enable us to organise ourselves in the best possible manner to deliver our new and different priorities as an integrated care board. As part of the change in focus, we are also moving to new premises, and I'm sure everybody will be very, very excited about the opportunity to have a single headquarters for the first time in NHS Devon. We'll be moving to Aperture House on Pines Hill Estate on the 12th of December 2023, and we've planned a series of induction events to welcome staff to the new site in that week. The final accommodation proposal was published last month, and that followed extensive consultation with staff on the decision to create a single HQ, and that will also lead to medium-term savings of £0.5 million a year, which in turn also contributes to the 30% running cost reduction that has been notified by Secretary of State. Finally, I have been involved both with the Chair and with others, briefing of MPs, which took place last month with a number of MPs from the local area, and also a meeting with the Health Minister, Helen Whately, and we were able to brief her about the work that's ongoing in Devon, as well as also being really clear about the pressures that we're currently facing and the ways in which we're tackling those. Very happy to take any questions from the board. Sarah.
Thank you. Although I would note that a lot of the points that you've covered are going to be covered in more detailed sections of the report. So may I suggest, colleagues, that we take those questions at that point. Thank you very much. So if I could ask us to note that, please. And come on now to my own chair's report. Again, because of the pressures of time, I'm not going to run through it in detail, but ask the committee the board to note it. But I would like to just take this opportunity to formally thank Professor Hisham Khalil, who is going to be stepping down from the board. Hisham's joining us online today. So Hisham, just from myself on a personal note, thank you so much for your support, for your dedication to your duties as chair of the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, and thank you for the experience and expertise you've brought to the board. And I'm particularly grateful that you've offered to stay on to contribute your expertise as a co-opted member of the Audit Committee, and you'll be attending our board meetings as well. But thank you so much for your service since the start of NHS Devon. We really appreciate it. Now, since writing my report, I've also received notification from Sarah Lugava, our partner member for mental health, that she will be stepping down from the board in due course and that this will be her last meeting in public. So I'd also like to take the opportunity, Sarah Lou, to say thank you to you. You've brought an extraordinary level of insight into the real lived experience of users of our services, your own experience as setting up a voluntary sector organisation, Parental Minds, has been really valuable, and we're going to miss you too. And there will, of course, be an open process that now we'll be starting to find your successor. But from all of us here, thank you very much for being a great colleague and for all the contributions that you've made over the last year and a half. So thank you very much. And I don't know whether either of you want to make a comment at this point, either Hisham, I can see, Hisham, did you want to come in?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to serve on NHS Devon, on the ICB, and working with colleagues. And there had to be a decision on my behalf to decide on, I think the best way forward was to allow me to carry on with my coalface clinical care profession and duties, and also to have the opportunity and the privilege to still contribute to NHS Devon. I'm very grateful to you as chair, and I'm very grateful to all colleagues, and hopefully I can continue my contributions as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Hisham. Sarah Lou, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody, especially those people who have been really supportive to me in this role. And I've seen a change in the board over the last 18 months, and which gives me confidence in stepping away, actually, that there are other people in the room that are thinking about children and people. There's other people in the room thinking about the voluntary sector and around mental health of the workforce as well as those who, as well as our service users. So I feel quite confident that those voices will stay in the room. And I just, the challenges are huge at the moment. There's some difficult decisions to be made, and my heart lies with Parental Minds, and that's where I need to focus at the moment. So thank you.
Thank you both very much. We're going to come on now to the section of our board meetings that we will be having going forward on our exit from the National Oversight Framework, segment 4. And leading on this, Alison Williams, our Improvement Director. Thank you very much, Alison.
And again, in the interest of time, I'm working on the assumption that everybody's read the detail contained within the paper. And clearly, it's helpful to read this paper and the next paper together in the context of understanding the reporting that will be coming to the board in future. Just very much as a high-level summary, the rationale for the ICB being part of the National Oversight Framework and allocated to NOF4 is identified within the paper, and the seriousness with which the board needs to take this, I know, is well understood around this table. And as part of the reset that Bill has discussed previously, it's probably timely just to almost remind ourselves of the reason why I am here as part of the mandated support. The fact that the improvement plans are driving both the ICB and the trusts, who are also the 3 acute trusts, who are also now in segment 4 of the oversight framework, to deliver the improvements necessary to be able to de-escalate. The planned timescale for that is end of Q1 next financial year. That is massively challenging. And as we sit here, it will be important through the oversight arrangements for both the board itself to assess whether or not that is appropriate in terms of timing, and whether the national milestones will have been met, but also will be part of the national oversight arrangements. So undoubtedly, come the spring, that will be subject to further discussion in detail around this board table. If I can take you to directly to the governance arrangements and the reporting outlined from bullet point 23 onwards. What is really important is that there is a very clear line of sight to the actions and the improvements that are being made from the national team all the way down through the board, right down into the organisation, so that there is clarity of purpose, clarity of action, and there is clear monitoring and remediation when the plans are being delivered or off course. And it is in that context that the change in the reporting arrangements as outlined in this paper are presented to the board for approval. There is a requirement for the assurance meeting that takes place monthly with the regional team to have a written report, and actually there are flash reports that are provided to region every week against the key actions that are required for improvements. And it is proposed in this paper that the performance reporting through to the board is completely aligned with that SIAG reporting, and therefore the report that will be received in the board, the first of which is the next paper on this board meeting, will now be received every month by the Finance and Performance Committee for detailed scrutiny and oversight, but will also be received by this board because it is important, and it's incumbent on me as the Improvement Director to remind the board of its duties. I know this is something that you know only too well and a duty you take seriously, but nevertheless in the context of this public meeting, to put those clear duties in the paper on record so that everybody understands those accountabilities is important. And it's in that context I draw your attention to the bullet points 27, 28 and 29 on page 10 of the report, which clearly identifies that the board, and by that I mean all members of the unitary board, independent members and executives, are jointly responsible for the planning allocation of resources to meet the core aims, and that reinforces the importance of the reporting and the ownership of the actions for improvement around this table. So I'll conclude there, Chair. I think the recommendations speak for themselves. It is for the board with its partners, and particularly with the acute trusts who are also in NOF4, to continuously review the delivery improvements so that de-escalation from NOF4 can be delivered in the most timely and appropriate way, and to constantly keep under review the internal line of sight to the improvement actions so that you are satisfied as a board that the improvement trajectories are being met, because this is not about getting out of NOF4. This is actually about the improvements to patient care that are the accountabilities of this board and the acute trust boards within Devon. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, that any board member might have.
Thank you very much, Alison. And just to make a note that we're being asked to note the report, but we're also being asked to agree that the assurance and oversight mechanisms for exiting NOF4 are appropriate and whether any other actions need to be taken. So I'm going to take questions first and then ask if we could note and agree. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you. Frank O'Kelly.
Thank you, Alison. I note that one of the reasons we're in NOF4 is the clinical strategy. I just asked the question, with us not having a clinical cabinet at the moment because of the pressures, where is that clinical strategy coming from and where is it being dealt with?
So the particular element that is associated with the NOF4 exit is the work of the Peninsula Acute Provider Collaborative. And there are some very specific requirements as part of that. Liz might want to come in as well, Chair, as the SRO. But just to reassure you that as part of that process, there have been significant engagement exercises with a whole host of clinicians from primary and secondary care, medical, nursing and allied health professionals who have been active participants in the work to co-produce some scenarios which are being worked through and will be brought back to the board at the appropriate time to look at the meaning of that. I think that if it gets to the point of any requirement for public consultation for clinical service change, then the whole clinical cabinet and the professional advisory structures would become extremely relevant as stakeholders in that. That feels a lot further down the track at the moment, but that ongoing engagement is critical. What I would say is we have struggled with some engagement with primary care clinicians, but we continue to work very actively through the CMOs on that. And Nigel might also want to comment as he's been actively involved as well.
Thank you very much, because I would like to bring Liz in next, because I also note that the self-rating on the Acute Services Sustainability Programme has gone from amber to red in the report, so it would be really helpful to hear your reflections on that.
Thank you, Chair. So just to pick up on the issue around governance in the first instance, and I'll pick up the progress that we are currently making. So in establishing the Peninsula Acute Provider Collaborative, because we're working across the wider peninsula, we've set up a governance reporting structure that ensures that we've got the right engagement at the right level and appropriate reporting into each of the provider boards, but also into the ICB. The programme of engagement is really critical to helping us understand the scenarios that will help answer the questions around the clinical strategy, and we've made good progress, as Alison has said. We're at a fairly critical process, and we've concluded the first phase of the work, and we are now working with our boards to get a mandate for the second phase of the work that enables us to move from a set of ideas and solutions to something that forms the basis of that clinical strategy. I think it's fair to say that the reason we're off track is because of some of the challenges, timeline challenges we've had, particularly around some of those clinical workshops as a result of the impact of industrial action. And it has been critical to us that we engage with our clinicians effectively each step of the process, and have had to step down a couple of meetings to allow for clinical services to be provided within our hospitals. But we are positive that we're now moving into the second phase and hopefully in a position to move forward and to rectify the position in terms of timescales.
Thank you, Liz. That's really helpful. I'm going to bring in Nigel Aitchison next.
Thanks very much, Frank. So picking up on what Liz said and what Bill said about the restructuring, as you probably are aware, unfortunately, the timeline for that, for various reasons, means that that's still ongoing. But as part of that, we are looking at the clinical advice and support that we get as an ICB, as opposed to the support that was available for a CCG. And as you also have been a massive kind of help with and support with the relationship that we're building with the Devon Collaborative Board, and how we, in our new structure, have a balance of that proper, or as representative primary care involvement in really important projects like the Acute Provider Collaborative. That's part of that restructuring, but really cognizant of the role the clinical and care professional cabinet is going to play. And so we've got the structure in place for that. We've got the membership defined much more clearly. That and I hope colleagues will find it helpful that the co-chairing of that will be Penny, myself, and a colleague from local authority. So we're really trying to broaden the sort of the remit of that clinical and care professional leadership. And also one of the members of that group will be the chair of the VCSE Assembly. So really trying to make sure that when that group considers such changes as necessary that Alison pointed to, we've got really, the best and broadest group of leaders involved as possible.
Thank you very much. I'll bring in Penny Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. And that does pick up our conversation yesterday. I think even though the Cabinet may not be in existence yet, I think the thing for me is about Michael West's work around dispersed clinical care professional leadership. And so that those principles may well have been adopted in the work to date. And I guess that's what I would ask, Liz. Has that been the case?
So when we established the Acute Provider Collaborative Commission, the work around the clinical strategy, and our chief medical officers helped us design the methodology, and they were very clear in designing the methodology how they wanted to ensure that we had broader clinical engagement and leadership, and that has been included in the principles of the work that we're taking forward. I think there's always room to improve on that, and I think what I would like to see is broader clinical engagement as the work progresses into phase 2 to include some of our other multi-professional teams, and would really welcome your engagement in helping us think about how that could be achieved.
Next, we're going to bring Kevin Orford. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a comment rather than a question, but I just wanted to say that I really welcome these new governance arrangements. I think it's very timely. This has been quite a long journey already, I think, in terms of, not just in terms of the practical aspects of what we have to do, but also in terms of mindset. And it's really useful to have this reminder of focus, really. And I just want to let you know that we did review this SAG report at the last Finance and Performance Committee. The next committee, which I think will be on the 19th of December, we've dedicated the entire committee meeting to do some deep dives into aspects of this to get the assurance that the board needs, and we'll report that into the board at its meeting in February. So thanks for the renewed focus, Alison, and just to give a commitment from my committee, and I think from the board as well, that that we welcome these changes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for the work that you're leading with your committee too. Liz, I think you wanted to come back as well.
Yes, and thank you. Just wanted to pick up on the NOF oversight arrangement. So again, I would echo Kevin's point. I think the strengthening of those governance arrangements, I think, is to be welcomed. As Alison has set out, is this a system issue with the acute trust also at the highest level of regulation, and it is important that we mirror those arrangements within our organisations to ensure that we have a system-based approach to it. And I think I'm confident that those arrangements have been put in place at organisational level.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful to note. So could I ask colleagues not only to note but to agree the assurance and oversight mechanisms set out? Yes, I don't hear any objections, so thank you very much, Philippa. We're going to move on now to the progress towards NOF4 exit with Bill Shields and Anthony Fitzgerald. So I don't know, is it...
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick off, and then Anthony will be able to add any further detail, and also possibly Kirsty in terms of the financial position. So we have implicitly talked about NOF4 exit in meetings before, because the integrated quality and performance report has referenced our performance, and the finance reports have referenced the ICB financial performance, and also that of system organisations in the ICS report that the board has received. What we're now doing is to be much more explicit and look at our performance and set that against each of the criteria that will allow us to exit NOF4. As you'll see from the report, whether we look at the current position on finance or on performance, we are not where we need to be. The financial requirements are that we deliver our plan this year, that we are in a position to move forward in our current financial position, which we're not currently in the position at the present time, and also a number of other constraints and a number of other elements, including having a capital plan. The only area where we're green at this point in time is around that capital plan, and it's arguably the case that that's the most straightforward thing for us to deliver on. And so as a consequence of that, there has to be some doubt about our ability to exit NOF4 by Q1 of 2024-25. We're continuing to focus on that and redoubling our efforts, but we know that this year is particularly challenging financially, and that next year, not only for NHS Devon but for the entire NHS, will be a very, very challenging financial year. And so as a consequence of that, we're refocusing how we deliver the financial position. That's required us to have a number of very detailed and intense meetings with system partners, both chief finance officers and also chief executive officers, and we continue to monitor our performance through the System Recovery Board and feeding into that the Finance and Planning Board. So there's a significant amount of work that still has to be done. The board cannot take assurance at this point in time current performance. And so that also I've written out to all of the chief executives in the system in terms of further workforce and non-pay controls which have been implemented with immediate effect. And that will mean that in terms of our workforce performance and also the impact that has on financial performance, we are moving into a very different phase. So, for example, that will mean that all non-clinical posts have to go through a very detailed process with vacancy control, and the default position is that they will not be looking to fill those posts. And in terms of clinical posts, we're looking at a position where we will be replacing on a one-for-one basis. That's not the position that we want to be in, but that's the position that we have to be in because of the fact that we are not delivering the financial position at this point in time. Kirsty can provide further detail if that's useful for the board, but I think what would be useful now is for Anthony to take us through our performance and the NOF4 exit criteria, as that references both elective care and also unscheduled care.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony.
Certainly, thank you. I'll start with unscheduled care because I think certainly that occupies most of our headlines and most of our thoughts, particularly around levels of risk. Unscheduled care, we have seen a stabilisation in terms of 4-hour performance, i.e. it is not getting worse. And there's a few reasons for that. One is we've set ourselves some very key areas to focus on in terms of admission avoidance and actually focusing on length of stay. We've seen continued improvements in no criteria to reside. So from this point last year, 19% was the figure around delayed discharges within our hospitals. That's come down between 12 and 13% at the moment. Our aspiration is to get that into single figures and moving towards 5. So we have seen improvement there. But in terms of 4-hour performance, we've seen stabilisation, as I've mentioned, but actually the ambulance handover times are not progressing in the way we would want them to. We have put in some strengthened governance around UEC, changing chair and constitution of our Urgent and Emergency Care Board. And part of the reason for that is to give us greater bandwidth, but also to be having much more focused conversations on the actions that need to happen within our providers, but also within our SWAST colleagues as well. We have our reconstituted board this afternoon in terms of UEC, and that will focus us on some further deep dives as to what we can do, particularly around ambulance handovers. We've worked with colleagues from Warrington and other systems where they have seen marked improvements in ambulance handover times. And that's partly because of changing models, but also because of around some of their collective understanding of risk across their systems. And we're taking some of that learning, a lot of that learning, and making sure that is being applied across our system as well. There was a meeting with our CEOs and CMOs a few weeks ago where that was discussed and what the opportunities would be across the system to do things differently. We've also had meetings with the national team where they've put in a fair degree of challenge into our current arrangements, but also challenged us to go further with our current aspirations. So there is a lot still to do in terms of UEC, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the context of winter in a few minutes or so. In terms of elective recovery, we have seen continued progress. However, that continued progress is within the context of an awful lot of insourcing and outsourcing work, which obviously doesn't help contribute to our financial position in the long term. So the piece of work that we're doing now is firstly to continue reducing our numbers, both in terms of those long waits, and we have seen progress both at 104, but also within the other domains across all providers. But actually our key piece of work is around sustainability of that and focusing very much on productivity. We've looked long and hard at what that opportunity means across Devon, and we've got some key areas of work which we'll be focusing on in our elective care board, setting some very real trajectories as to how we do that, because we see that's the key to sustained delivery of elective care, but also helping our financial position as well.
Thank you very much. Now, does anyone have any questions for either Bill or Anthony? Yes, Kevin Orford.
Yeah, thanks for this, Anthony. Just some of these, my first question might merge into the winter report that's coming next, but no criteria to reside. We are making progress on that, but the plan was 5%, wasn't it? Are we still aiming for 5%? Have we still got a plan to get to 5%? And my follow-up to that is, what impact do we think it's having of not, of being at 12 or 13% rather than 5%?
Certainly. So it is still our aim and our aspiration to get to 5%. However, that would make us the best in the country. Okay, so considering where we started wasn't the best in the country, and no criteria to reside also needs to be seen in the context of length of stay. The majority of people still walk into hospital and walk out, so focusing on no criteria to reside without focusing on length of stay always causes problems. I am confident we can get into single figures, and part of the issue that we have is the variation across the system. We have some providers who are chief executive of one of them sitting next to me, actually, who have really good performance, but we do know there are pockets, particularly in the north of the county, where a different approach and much more focused work is required to get us down to that overall number. There's quite a robust programme of work and a trajectory across all of our localities to get to that figure, and in most of those areas they are on trajectory. However, there are exceptions, and that's what's keeping us at 12%.
Thanks. And can I just ask a question on the elective as well? So this needn't necessarily be answered in this board meeting, Anthony, but obviously we've got a Finance and Performance Committee in a couple of weeks' time. And it's really what I'm trying to understand is this point around us reducing the cost of delivery of elective by reviewing the insourcing and the outsourcing. But I'm keen to understand the impact of that on the really long waiters, because we still have 104-week waiters, and on a kind of draft forecast to the end of the year that I saw a couple of weeks ago, we were still going to have 104-week waiters. In fact, they were increasing for the end of the year, and it was draft. It wasn't fixed at that point. But I think it is an important point for the board to consider whether or not that is what we want if we're reviewing the cost of the insource and outsourcing. So I just wondered, at what point can we sort of get a fix on the modelling of that, and will we be able to have something for the next Finance and Performance Committee?
Yes, certainly. We've done some considerable amount of modelling since the last Finance Performance Committee. The 104 number has disappeared, so those long waiters no longer exist, which is good news. We are not stopping insourcing and outsourcing, but what we are intending to do is replace it with something more sustainable as a model, and that's focusing on the key 8 areas of productivity, which we will go through a lot of detail at the next Finance and Performance Committee. We think there's huge opportunity.
Thanks for that. That's really reassuring. I look forward to the conversation in a couple of weeks' time then. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a number of colleagues that want to come in. I've got Judy Hargaden, Sheena Asthana, and also Graham Clark. So I'll take them in the order they came. So that is Judy Hargaden first.
Thank you very much. And can I just first of all thank the executive team, because this reporting here and that we've had in other reports here is excellent. It's the best information we've had to help us understand what's happening. I'm sorry, I seem to be echoing. May I ask questions of 2 areas? One was just where Anthony and Kevin were talking about the insourcing, outsourcing. And I just wanted to be sure that you were going to pick up where there is underutilization of NHS facilities because of people going to non-NHS facilities as part of that model. And my second question links to the issue of new models of care, which the report very clearly says has been not achieving the aspirations we had for it. I would like to understand a little better what, and I know Steve Webster's new in post, but what actually the plans are for getting that piece of work going. Thank you.
I can certainly respond to the elements in terms of capacity and productivity, and that's what we are looking at very, very clearly. We know we have opportunities using our existing facilities, but to use our existing facilities, we have to have a system approach, and that's using all available capacity for all patients. And I'm very pleased to say that we've made a lot of progress on that over the last few months. That's going to feed into our productivity review, and to make sure we're using all of our theatres on a Friday afternoon, that we're not bringing people back to outpatients unnecessarily. We're looking at opportunities for patient-initiated follow-up where possible, and also using technology as well. So there are some gains we can make, and I think that will help us both in terms of improving productivity, but also our sustainability, which is a key element for this.
Thank you. I'm not sure, Bill, you've indicated you'd like to come in. Do you want to respond to a point that's already been made, or to come in later?
Yes, please, if I could, Chair. So two things to answer the points made by Kevin, and Anthony's just picked up some of those, but also the points made by Judy. So in terms of insourcing and outsourcing, as Anthony said, we have been through the numbers again and are confident that we have resolved the position as it relates to 104-week waits. We did some modelling that looked at the impact of insourcing and outsourcing on both 78 and 65-week waits. That's not something that we're pursuing at this time. What was necessary was for us to give an indication to NHS England about what the impact would be. As Anthony said, and it's absolutely right, we have to look at the productivity of our own facilities, and this is something that's been reinforced by NHS England and in dialogue with them, so that we look at that productivity, because as the board is aware, and as we've discussed before here and in the Finance and Performance Committee, the NHS widely has seen a significant reduction in productivity since the pandemic. We are an outlier against the average position across the NHS, and it's just something that we need to look at. And we have got protected elective capacity in Devon in the form of the Nightingale, and we need to make sure that we utilise that facility and other facilities as best we can. In terms of new models of care, yes, it's disappointing. We were looking to see a significant impact on new models of care, and that work stream is one that's not delivered against, but it's still the right thing to do. And Alison, myself and Kate Shields had a discussion with Liz last week when we looked at the work of the Acute Provider Collaborative and how we might ensure that through that vehicle we deliver in terms of new models of care. And so, as well as looking at what might happen in the system in terms of clinical services, we also need to think about productivity within individual specialties. We need to think about where we are with fragile services and the way in which we deliver against those. And we also need to think about productivity at a granular level. So in terms of clinical productivity, so we're talking about the number of patients on lists, we're talking about the comparative performance of different clinicians within the same specialty. Some of those things that we looked at and focused on in the past, but I think it's fair to say there's been less focus in the current position, certainly since the pandemic. Clearly, that's been very, very difficult with industrial action. Hopefully, that will be something that we can revisit and can deliver on as we go through the remainder of this year. But certainly next year, it remains a major focus for us in our cost reduction plan and productivity improvement plan for next year.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Sheena Asthana next, and then to Graham Clark.
Thank you. It's very clear in things like the care coordination work, in the winter plan, that we're working with a wider range of partners, not just at lower levels of the healthcare service, but also outside the healthcare service, the VCSE sector, the local authority, etc. Similarly, my understanding of new models of care would be that it's about shifting left. It's about shifting away from a hospital focus to prevention, earlier diagnosis and care within the home, preferably, or the community. So that often does not involve the acutes. So we're doing that sort of work, or we're certainly trying to do that sort of work. However, in the way in which we're reporting about NOF4, very, very NHS focused, and it's particularly acute focused. And I can understand that because NHSE is our sponsor. However, I have concerns about the optics of this in terms of what our wider partners think about the direction of travel. And I think that there is a risk that our wider partners will think that we're just retreating back into CCG land. We're becoming all about the NHS again and not about the system as a whole. And then there's also a risk that as a system, because of the importance of system thinking, both within the NHS and with our partners, that this is the way the system is going to work if we're going to shift left, that if there is a fear that we're retreating back into NHS thinking, that we'll lose those hearts and minds. And that's going to have a really important impact on sustaining some of the things we're trying to do under the winter plan that may be seen as short term. You know, again, we call on the BCSE sector on a short term basis. We need to work out ways of really embedding long term relationships and resourcing them properly. So I'm sure that I'm being overly negative, but I'm just very, very concerned that we depict ourselves as a system, you know, as a wider system, as I understood the ICB was originally charged to do, accepting all the pressures and things like that.
Sheena, I think Nigel Aitchison would like to respond to your point. Nigel.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sheena. So I think the new models of care, there's a bit of a confusion in how it's described. So a lot of what Bill's talked about is what I would put in the transactional space, although some of it will ultimately be transformational as well. But what you're talking about, I think, is the transformational piece around, as you say, that left shift. So that wonderful Venn diagram of prevention, complex comorbidity and frailty, and the health inequality sort of areas that come together. And I think what we've tried to do in the restructuring, so as Bill said, you know, as part of the restructuring, what we're trying to do is design an organisational structure that can then deliver for the people of Devon the things that we as an ICB are set up to do. And as you know, in the CMO Directorate, we've got a Director of Population Health, you know, front and centre of that. And so in our operational planning and the process that we're going to put together with Kirsty and Bill's help for that operational planning, I think will allow us to make some of those cases to invest in that left shift. And of course, that's not going to be an easy conversation in our system because of the pressures, but by doing it that way, we can then say, well, if we're going to be doing those right transformational things in that space, what are the disinvestments we need to make in order to make those investments? So I think in answer to your question and the real importance of demonstrating to all of those system partners, I hope that what we'll be able to describe in the weeks to come will be that very approach to how we do that.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Graham Clark next and then Hisham Khalil.
Thank you. So being in SOF4 and NOF4 is not new to us, but I think a number of things have all precipitated the much needed focus, not least I think the H2 submission that we had to make, where we had to put a mirror up to ourselves in terms of how are we doing. So I, for one, very much welcome that focus, and I think this report we see in front of us is one of the crispest, most crisp and concise summaries, so I very much welcome this is the format. However, it is inevitably always slightly out of date. It's already dated October. Some of the data is to September. Most of the actions that are listed should have already happened. So I see this as a pivotal period of a reset. And for that to work means, I think expressions already been used, hearts and minds being behind it. And I'm very conscious that we are reorganising, that there are inevitable barriers and inertia. It seems to me that there's probably a lot of support at the most senior level of the system, but I'm really asking, is that being followed by all the organisations culturally? Have we really thought about the barriers? Are we really confident that we've got in place that now changing around the corner and making improvements? So it's a very open question, but I think that's the really pivotal thing that we need to achieve.
Did anyone want to come in and reflect on that? Yes, I can see Bill Shields.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Graham. I think one of the key things that's different is that we have appointed through, with support from the NHS Intensive Support Team, a Programme Management Office Director. So Toby Hewlett has joined us and he will be leading the PMO. We are also, as part of discussions within the executive, looking to redeploy individuals who can form part of that programme management office, and this will be a system-wide PMO that focuses on UEC in particular and also on our financial performance. So I think that will help us to drive the changes that we require. It will also mean that we become less reliant on external support in the form of consultancy, and I know there have been concerns expressed about that at the Finance and Performance Committee and also in this board, and that will give us that momentum that I think is sometimes we have lacked. The point in terms of the data that are presented and the timeliness of those is one that's well made. And look at how we can ensure that we are reporting on a much more frequent basis. We do that through the System Recovery Board, and I think that this board can take assurance from the information that is discussed and the data that are shared at the System Recovery Board and also in the Finance and Planning Board. System Recovery Board has non-executive representation in the form of Kevin Orford, so we can take some assurance from that, but I'm very happy for that information to be provided on a much more granular and regular basis to any board member if there are any concerns that they may have. And as a consequence of that, hopefully they'll see that we are looking at this performance on a very regular basis, and the data exists to allow us to be able to scrutinise that and also to be able to take the appropriate assurance.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to be giving the last word to Alison Williams, but before that I'd just like to bring in Hisham Khalil, who's online. Thank you, Hisham.
Thank you very much, Chair. Anthony highlighted, and in the report, there's going to be quite a lot of future work on urgent and emergency care. My question relates to whether there are any specific milestones or timeframes for achieving certain objectives in relation to that. It relates to what we have seen in the Quality Committee of actual harm happening to patients because of delays in urgent and emergency care. And in fact, we were discussing having real-time harm reporting, which would give us better insight into harm that happens to patients. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison, do you feel you could respond to that point as well, or was it an entirely separate point that you wanted? A separate point. Yes, so Anthony, thank you.
Certainly, I can respond to that. I think there are a number of things that are happening. We do have trajectories in terms of our 4-hour performance. We're off those trajectories at the moment. We're not envisaging recasting them yet. However, we will be looking at our ambulance handover delay trajectories, because I think that is perhaps what the element where we're carrying the most risk. Related to that, then, there is a renewed focus on harm reviews and making sure that those are all in place. And we're having some conversations at the moment about actually some of the safety concerns relating to that with CNO and CMO colleagues.
And I can see Penny Smith would like to come in on this too. Thank you.
And thank you. I was going to raise it in the Quality Committee report, but I think it's fitting that we have a rounded conversation at this time. So we have received correspondence from Sue Dehenny and Michael Marsh from the region regarding the role of the system quality groups in really looking at harm reviews above and beyond individual cases. Our harm profile, we have a surprisingly small number of serious incidents related to harm have been raised, considering our performance. So I think there's a really important piece to do here, because the performance targets, the access targets, are clinically underpinned, as we all know. They do impact on the quality of care and safety. So I really look forward to working with you and Nigel on that more.
Thank you, Penny. I'm going to come now to Alison Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back to the hearts and minds point, because it's a really important one. And this may seem a subtle difference, but NOF4, arguably, as a concept, is not something that our staff at ground level should be worrying about, because that is an accountability for improvement that sits around this table and around the board tables of our acute trusts. And it is about the accountability for improvement that needs to be driven top to bottom in the organisation. What it means for staff on the ground is we've got to improve the way that we're delivering services to patients. We've got to improve our urgent and emergency care offer. We have to improve our waiting times. And I think those are very key responsibilities that staff are owning. And so I don't think we have an issue about the hearts and minds of staff in wanting to achieve those improvements. The financial ask is always more difficult, but to be fair, again, to both the ICB and the trusts, what I see is increasingly very honest conversations about systems needing to live within their means, and that there isn't a white charger with a bag full of money coming over the hill to buy your way out of the difficulties that you're experiencing. And quite frankly, even if there was, the staff are not there in order to address that. So I think that element of hearts and minds I would observe, but it means something very different at different levels within the system. I don't know, I can see Liz nodding, Bill and others, but I think that distinction for staff is really important if they're going to engage in the solutions. They're not going to be interested in de-escalating from NOF 4 to NOF 3. What they are going to be interested in is improving services for patients.
And thank you very much, because it's of absolute key importance to our community, so thank you for that. So just in summarising this section of the report, what we're being asked to do is to note that we can't currently provide assurance that the target of NOC 4 exit date of Q1 24-25 can be met. But we've heard that there's a huge effort going into being able to provide that assurance at a future meeting. So I'd like to thank all of our staff and all of our clinical community for what they're doing to try and achieve that. So thank you. I'm going to come on now to the paper that we received on additional assurance over winter. And so that's back to you, Anthony. Thank you very much. Anthony Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for this document coming out late. Part of that was around the large amount of editing that had to happen because there is an awful lot of detail behind this summary document. We're happy to share that detail upon request. I think there are a few things I want to raise. I am taking it as read that people have gone through the report, and I'm sure there'll be a number of questions. But there are some things I would like to raise in relation to this. Obviously, winter planning does not sit in isolation. It is part of what we do, and I think our first conversations around winter for this year actually started in January. So it has been something that we have been working on for some considerable time. Although we did not receive winter planning guidance until August of this year, actually that guidance was very comprehensive and gave really good direction to the plans that were already in place. And a lot of those plans were around additional funding, and we did receive additional funding for winter as part of our overall UEC improvement processes. And we took some time to put of those into place, learning our lessons from the last 2 years, recognising this cannot just all be about additional beds. There is a lot of work that we need to do in terms of admission avoidance, but also in terms of improving discharge as well. The majority of those schemes are now online, with the last remaining ones coming online over the next couple of weeks. Within the report, though, you will see our attempts to apply some science in terms of the delivery, the expectations, and actually what that looks like as a mitigated bed model. And we've done that using real data. I think the danger in a number of settings is to be over-optimistic with modelling, and we've tried to apply some real-life figures, both in terms of the increase in attendance that we've seen, both across our acute providers, but also within primary care as well. So the figures that you'll see in the figure 2 actually reflect where we believe we are at the moment. It's called a waterfall diagram because actually what it does is demonstrate the impact of the mitigations of our overall bed gap. What we've seen within this is that we still have a gap, but that gap is around 22 beds. This time last year, it was significantly more than that, and the year before, it was significantly more than that as well. We believe there is a lot more we can do, and so we've gone back and discussed across our system what that could look like. And we've identified some further opportunities which we're working through. There is still the question of actually what we can fund and what we can't, and we're discussing with national and regional colleagues whether there is further opportunities for funding, but also what we can do internally, recognising the system pressures we have on our finances anyway. Within that, we think that we can do something around improving our P1 and P2 capacity to help with our no criteria to reside position. We've already heard around the care coordination hub and spoke models, but we also think there is something we can do around respiratory intensive support, or primary care support rather, and also around what we can do in terms of mental health support as well. We're looking at the prioritisation of those, how they can be staffed, and then the overall impact on the mitigations in terms of our waterfall diagrams. And we're rerunning that model every couple of weeks so that we've got a really proactive understanding of what is happening in the system. A couple of other points that I would like to make, though. We recognise that actually winter, in the context of overall UEC improvement, requires a different approach, and we have made some changes, as we've mentioned, in terms of our governance. We will continue to work through that and iterate as necessary. I'm very pleased that and James has agreed to be SRO for UEC, but also making sure that we've got dedicated medical support into that, and also making sure that our nursing colleagues are included as part of our overall system recovery work. A key element, though, for what we're doing over winter focuses on our Strategic Coordination Centre, and that is the hub of how we will be delivering winter and emergency care going forward. One of the great things about moving into Aperture House next week is it gives us the opportunity to have a real physical care coordination centre, or SCC as we would call it. And using a system called Shrewd, we will be able to take a much more proactive approach to system pressures, i.e. intervening before they've got too far. And working with our SWAST colleagues, we'll have real-time information. That area will be staffed 7 days a week, and we've actually agreed the staffing model for that over the last couple of weeks, using some of our redeployments internally to assist with that. And I'm very grateful for those people that we have encouraged to work in that, or rather volunteered to work in that centre. But actually, I think that is going to be a real game changer for us in terms of what we're doing on a daily basis. We've also worked with our local authority colleagues to try and ensure that those delays and that no criteria to reside elements, which we talked about earlier, that we're taking every opportunity to work through that, and we're very pleased with the system working that is evident in those particular areas, recognising we've still got some pressures in the north of the county which we need to work through as well. And I guess the last thing for me is around communications, both in communications to our staff, but also to the public more generally. The Care Coordination Centre, which James spoke about this morning, has highlighted some real deficits in our communication and understanding, and we need to work further on that as we get into winter, which is almost here, to make sure that those messages are getting clearly out to the public, but also that we're using the whole system to address the pressures that we know that we're going to be receiving. I'm happy to take any questions around that. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see Donna Manson coming first. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, and as you know, we've had extensive engagement. I think what's important to discuss, though, as we saw last year, that spike in expensive placements that none of us actually wanted to see happen. We've had extensive discussions about that, but you know, when it gets to the nub of it, it's that challenge between that percentage target of no criteria to reside and the decision making and pace. And I'm interested in, do we all understand to what extent we can hold greater risk with that target? Because in extensive discussions we had, linking to the previous paper about living within our means, we see these extensive costly placements And I'm interested in the debate we had on that about to what extent you can hold that target or flex that target, or to what extent is it a red herring, and what is going to come on from different system governance to this board if we were actually not to be so focused on that target, but to actually get sustainable, affordable placements and not get risks pushed into making these very rapid discussions which are creating long-term costs. So I know we've discussed it extensively, but I think it's important here that we understand that tension, because I certainly think that, and back to the previous about exiting North, we're not going to get there unless we hold risks differently. So is there a technical piece of that target setting that this board can take to another level to challenge, to say that we can't get out of that other place unless we get a bit more space in that target?
I can see that Bill Shields would like to come in and respond to that point. So I'm going to go to Bill first, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for the question, Donna. For the board's information, Donna and her team and myself and Anthony met earlier this week, last week rather, and we had a very detailed conversation about the Better Care Fund and some of the decisions that have been made and how we would work in a different way going forward. And that was absolutely about risk and about the costs that we were seeing as a consequence of decisions, in some cases being made by individuals and organisations at a lower level than schemes of reservation and delegation should determine, and that decisions often being made in haste because of concerns about risk or because of perceptions about risk, then leading to significant cost and disruption, for example, in the care home market, which is something that we then need to live with, and our colleagues in local government have to live with as well. So we're very committed to looking at this in a different way, to getting a longer term solution, and to doing that in partnership between ourselves in health and colleagues in local government, so we can have a combined effort on this going forward. And I'm very confident in the discussion that we've had thus far that we'll see a different way developing as a consequence of the discussions, which were very productive.
Thank you, and I can also see Anthony Fitzgerald would like to come back in on this point.
Thank you. I think thank you for your question and the point, Donna, and for Bill's clarification. There's just two things I would like to say. Firstly, as I think taking any particular standard out of context is always dangerous, and part of the strength and governance arrangements we've put in place, which I should have mentioned, is about increasing the seniority of our winter response team, if we put it like that. We're very fortunate that we do have a winter director, we're externally funded, so that will help in holding the ring on some of this, but also making sure we're making the right decisions. In strengthening the SCC, which is a key element for delivery, we've also made sure we've got seniority in that team as well, so they're not just looking at one element, they can actually see things much more in the round. And also being able to have those weekly conversations around what's been happening and also looking forward as well. So I think those elements combined put us into a different place, but I think as a senior team we need to make sure that we're looking at this as well.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Donna, or Anthony?
Yes, I just think it's really important that we see that graph change this winter, because you just need to look at the graphs from last winter. It's not sustainable and affordable, and then it's very difficult to work with families once we've made that decision. So in terms of outcome for patients as well, we're often making decisions at pace at a level where there isn't that bigger accountability that we talked about earlier, and knowledge, and we're not making the right decisions. So I'm just making it's a really important piece of work going into the winter, and at the time on a weekly basis to look at that should be across partnerships to do this, because we can challenge ourselves on it. So it's just a point to say that there's a commitment to do that, but we all need to commit to it if we want to see those graphs coming down.
So would you like to put it as an action point that we revisit this at a future board, so that we can be looking at this on an ongoing basis?
This year in some of the budget setting, we had some really robust discussions about what was affordable, and that was a huge discussion in some parts of funding. And it's fantastic to sit and know some of that's holding. But I think this is another area where we've got to set ourselves a target of getting that graph down, of holding more risk because we're not making the right decisions. So I do think it should need some form of oversight to see how we're doing with that, and to make sure that it has got the right level of delegated authority. So I do think there is an action required out of it so that you've got that oversight of what are really constructive, different ways of doing things.
Thank you. And this would be a good point to bring in Kevin Orford. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, but first of all, I really welcome the report, Anthony. It's a very clear report. I agree with you. It feels like we're in a very different place to where we were a year ago, and I know that's thanks to the work that you've done on all of this. And I also welcome, to the last point, I welcome the new focus on the alignment of the Better Care Fund to the winter priorities. It's really good to hear that, and it would be good to just get some sight on that at the Finance and Performance Committee at some point. My question, though, just goes to paragraph 11 of the report, which talks about the review of the winter schemes that we funded, which I think came to the board July, August last year. And there were some difficult prioritisation decisions to take last August, weren't there? And the conversation that we had at the board when we had sight of that, there were some hard questions around the priorities that we'd taken, actually. So my question really is just around how this board or a subcommittee becomes cited on the changes that you're making to what was agreed in the summer. And then my follow-up to that would be, have we, I mean, you talk about lots of lessons that we've learned over the last 2 years. Have we learned any lessons from the way that we did that exercise back in July and August for when we do this again next year?
So 2 elements there. I think in terms of any additional investment and alteration to investment, we'd make sure finance performance were briefed on that. And there have been some changes in terms of allocations, but I think part of that, they are justified in that, it's either staffing or things haven't started on time. So we can bring an update on that. And I know that the finance team have done a lot of work at looking at that, where things were started, perhaps not on time, perhaps where there, I won't say slippage, but perhaps where some expenditure hasn't been as per plan, but also where other elements have been built into that. The bit that's identified within the paper is around additionality, and obviously we're not making decisions around that, but we do know how we would be spending money if it was allocated, and again we would want that to go through finance performance as well. I think the lessons for us are actually using, going forward, using the data as part of the planning process at a much earlier stage, and I think that's one of the key lessons that I think we've already learned. And also then to look at what the system opportunities are rather than individual providers. And I think traditionally we've focused very much at individual provider level, but also the separation between acute, out of hospital and primary care. And we've not looked across the breadth of the services that we have and what other opportunities there would be. We did have a winter preparedness event on the 28th of September. I think I would have preferred that we did that earlier, but appreciate why we didn't. Industrial action has been a spanner in a number of our works this year. But actually going forward, I would want us to be having a much clearer evaluation process of what's happened this winter, but also those planning events to be built every quarter across next year as well, so we can make better decisions using the data and also evaluating much earlier as well.
Thanks, Anthony. And just on industrial action was my second point, really, because obviously yesterday we were notified of pre-Christmas and early New Year action, which obviously isn't referenced in here because we didn't know about it at the time. What do we need to do? Because we won't have a board meeting between now and that industrial action. Is there anything that we need to be cited on, particularly around our response to that?
Yeah, we've already, well, as you can imagine, the announcement was made at a certain point in time, and within an hour we were asked for our plans in terms of mitigations. We started work on that to look at what our resilience needs to be, what the impact is going to be across urgent emergency care services as well as elective. There will be a briefing document which we can supply in relation to that, because it's going to be a difficult time, and that's at a difficult time as well. We will be redoing our model based on what we understand, but of course in terms the differences between elective care and unscheduled care in terms of industrial action are very different as well. So we'll be factoring that in, and what we need to do in terms of additionality and strengthening our response over that period as well. So the planning is already in place. We've got submissions which have to be made by Friday, and then we've got further discussions next week as to what that looks like.
Thank you. Now, I'm very conscious of time. Bill would like to come back in, and then we're going to take brief questions from Judy, Alison and Liz. So, Bill.
Yeah, just a brief point, and it's to build on what Anthony said and to answer address Kevin's concerns. So on the investment we're talking about, there's always a tension between investing things at pace and standing things up really quickly, but also making sure that they're appropriately governed. So all of the investments that we're looking at now, we're taking through an investment group that's chaired by myself. And so we ensure that it goes through that process. We then need to ensure that it goes through the Finance and Planning Board to ensure that we adhere to the double and triple lock requirements of an organisation that's in NOF4. And we are doing that with all of the investments. At the same time, Steve Webster, the Financial Improvement Director, is also reviewing all of the investments that have taken place since the pandemic, since 2019-20, to determine whether those investments actually delivered against the objectives, whether they're investments that should continue, or whether we should deprioritise and reprioritise those. So hopefully the board can take some assurance from that process.
Thank you for that. So, Judy Hargaden.
Thank you very much. And I would like to comment on the increased sophistication of the discussions that we have around these issues now. The points that Donna just made and the fact that we're very engaged with it are excellent. You know, there has been some sense of being on a bit of a hamster wheel sometime. One additional very interesting point I thought in Anthony's report is the point 16 about the fact that we are seeing a disproportionate increase in demand in Devon. I know there is work to be done on that, and I just wondered whether we had any conclusions from that yet, or whether we could ask to have that come back to us in future.
We have a lot of information. I don't think we necessarily have the conclusions at the moment. We're seeing some trends which are very locality based and also very age related as well. There does seem to be some correlation with different primary care setups, but also there are also some issues with individual acute providers as well. We are working with regional and public health colleagues to try and understand that, because that's in the context of a sustained period of increased demand across both acute and primary care. So it isn't just one element of the system that's being hit. We are expecting further cuts of that data this week, and then also to be able to learn some lessons from that. I've been more than happy to bring back some information relating to that.
Thank you. We come now to Alison Williams.
I think what the last two reports have demonstrated to the board is the real tension between needing to manage risk, particularly in the urgent emergency care space, and finance. And those two things are going to have to be kept under very close and constant review over the next few months. The industrial action is undoubtedly going to put additional pressure, but also additional cost into the system, none of which is currently accounted for in any of the forecasts. Devon won't be alone in that, but I think the board needs to recognise that that is an inevitability, as the experience of previous industrial actions will have told us. I think, coming back though to Donna's point, the pressure that will be put on the system to maintain flow, particularly during the end of December and the first 2 weeks of January, is always difficult, but with the added industrial action and the pressure, the additional pressure that will be on primary care, because people will be looking to access services more in primary care because they'll know what's happening with industrial action in hospitals, could mean that there could be rapid decision making that, to your point, if it's not joined up, will put people in the wrong place. Which isn't just a cost issue, but actually is a quality issue for where people are receiving care. So I would suggest that there may need to be some further discussions about the cadence of decision making between health and social care for the placement of patients who need to be exiting hospital really quickly to maintain flow during those difficult times. So I suspect it's going to need a different focus, Donna and Anthony, with the acute providers in that first 2 weeks of January, more than ever has been required before.
Thank you. I'm going to come now to Liz Davenport.
I think actually my point builds on the one that Alison has raised, so really welcome the SCC as a coordinating centre, but I guess one of the opportunities we have through that is to make sure that we not only balance risk across the wider system, but make sure that we're making really prompt decisions, particularly when in points of escalation. I just wonder if you could say a little bit about how you anticipate that working through the SCC.
For those people that don't know, Shrewd is quite an interesting system. Firstly, in terms of live data capture, but also the ability to build in some degree of predictability in terms of algorithms, i.e. forecasting what is going to happen if you don't intervene. Although we have actually gone live with Shrewd, we've not made a lot of noise about it because that's part of the work we need to do in making sure our escalation processes are fully aligned across the system. And that's currently what we're calibrating to make sure that by next week that is all in place. I think also by putting some seniority into the team, using experience to be able to predict what is going to happen without intervention, that is also part of what we're doing and part of the strengthened governance arrangements that we're putting in place. And also then making sure we're using people's time wisely. I think there is a tendency in lots of systems to commentate on what is happening rather than thinking about what we're going to do to make it different. And certainly in terms of the new Opal framework, which perhaps is a more accurate way than we've ever had of predicting challenges across the system, using that to very, very clearly articulate what is happening at individual provider level and also being prepared to challenge whether that's really happening or not. So I think those elements together are going to put us in a much more strengthened place going into what is going to be a very difficult few weeks.
Thank you. And on that sobering note, I think we are going to take a break now, a short break for 10 minutes. I apologise, I know we're running late from the timetable, but I think it was important that we gave the opportunity for the petitioners to actually have the opportunity to be presented. So thank you for your patience. So we'll reconvene in just up to 10 minutes. Thank you. Well, thank you and welcome back to the NHS Devon Integrated Care Board meeting. We're coming on now to the section about our governance arrangements, and there's a number of items that Philippa Harding is going to take us through, including some areas where we're seeking the board's approval. So thank you very much, Philippa.
Thank you. And this report very much builds on the items that we've already had today, which indicates the reset and the increased focus on our NOF4 exit. In order to do this, we're proposing the creation of an executive committee. So that's the area that I'll focus on in the first instance. Our executive team has been meeting as an executive committee in shadow form, but we're keen to establish this formally as a committee of the board. So the terms of reference are included in the report as an appendix, and the board is being asked to approve these terms of reference. There's one minor amendment that I do need to bring to board members' attention, which is a slip of the finger in typing. I managed to include NHS Sussex Board rather than NHS Devon Board as my predecessor organisation, so apologies for that, but it's very much designed to be NHS Devon Board's Executive Committee terms of reference. So I'll pause there and ask for any questions and comments or whether the board's happy to approve.
Thank you. It was a very clear report. So does anyone have any points? No. So yes, we'll take that as a yes, and thank you.
Thank you. And then the second set of terms of reference that are included in the report are those for the Remuneration Committee and the ICB Workforce Committee. We've been talking about these in committee meetings for some time, and at the last committee meeting we had an opportunity to discuss proposed amended terms of reference. There are again a couple of minor amendments that I'm proposing in addition to what's included in the report that have come through comments since the papers were circulated. Notably that it would be helpful to make it clear that the Chief People Officer and Director of Governance will be expected to be in attendance at every meeting of the Remuneration Committee. Also that meetings shouldn't take place without the Chair or Vice Chair of the meeting being present. And finally, to really tie in and emphasise the committee's role in relation to the board appraisal process, so that paragraph 310 refers to reviewing the outcomes of the NHS Devon board performance evaluation process, including thematic outcomes from appraisals that relate to the performance and effectiveness of the NHS Devon board. And these have been shared with the chair of the Remuneration Committee, who's content with those proposed amendments. And the proposed terms of reference were reviewed by the Remuneration Committee and recommended to the board for approval.
Do we have any questions or comments on that? Yes, Donna Manson.
Okay, in terms of this report, but just a question in terms of the challenge we have with agency and delivering best value, is that where will that real challenge of, turning agency into permanent, stable staffing on your, what I would say, the core frameworks of remuneration, how will those two pieces of work have oversight and be brought together? Because back to previous papers, that has to be our penultimate focus to make sure we get stable, dedicated, long-term staffing plans, and also in terms of the costs. So I just wonder, how that oversight will link in with this, because often we look at these places, but we forget that other piece that's really challenging for us.
Thank you very much. So I think, yes, it's worth focusing on the fact that these are terms of reference for the ICB remuneration and workforce, so they don't relate to that wider system issue. However, there are other places where those wider system issues are being looked at, most notably on a regular basis at the System Recovery Board. However, within the current governance structure and the Board Assurance Committee structure, we have a People and Culture Committee as well, which that falls within that remit. But I think it's worth flagging, as board members know from the conversations that we've been having in our development sessions, that we need to look at our governance arrangements to make sure that we're happy that they are as strong as they can be, and we'll be kicking that work off in the next week or so.
Thank you. I can see that Bill Shills would like to come in on this point as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Point made by Don is a good one, and we haven't had the focus that we should have had on agency costs across the system. That's one of the elements that was referenced in the letter that I sent to chief executives, and we've been very, very clear about the utilisation of agency, particularly off-framework agency, requires chief executive sign-off in each of the provider organisations as well as in this organisation. So it's something we're focused on. It will certainly be something that we look at in the System Recovery Board and in the Finance and Planning Board, but I think it's a point that's well made and something that we will ensure that the board is decided on and has appropriate assurance to.
Thank you. And Sheena, you wanting to come in, Sheena Asthana.
Yeah, it's on a similar point to Donna's, but so I mean, my feeling is as a system, there are some kind of key challenges ahead of us in terms of how we look at the way in which that system changes. That means leadership around new role definitions, particularly with the use of digital, new team structures, potentially structures that then go beyond the NHS. We were talking earlier on about the Care Coordination Centre and how we start to bring in multidisciplinary and indeed multi-sector teams coming in. We've got issues of stress and retention, which then lead to problems with the ICB. And I suppose I'm just wondering about the sense of having this, of separating out ICB workforce from wider workforce issues, whether or not it's cost effective to have these issues dealt with by two separate committees, and whether or not we should be trying to sort of think quite carefully in the governance review about joining these issues up, because I think they're so critical to our future, and we need some, again, sort of system-wide, but also slightly future-orientated thinking to work out how the relative roles of different staff are going to play in. And I'm not too sure. I think that kind of is a system issue, but it's also a multi-sector issue as well. It's just a similar observation.
Thank you, and I think Alison might want to come in as well, but I completely agree. I think there's something about maintaining the purity of a remuneration committee and looking at a workforce committee potentially as a separate wider issue as well. And I think there's something that we should be thinking about as part of the governance review. I think it's important that we got the terms of reference for the remuneration committee right now. That doesn't mean that we can't continue to think about it in the wider context of the work that we're thinking around all our committees.
Thank you. Alison.
Just to build on that, the statutory requirements for a remuneration committee are very, very clear. And there is always a risk that if you try to load too much into those committees, that you end up diluting the statutory functions. So I think the point is really well made, and as we look forward to the next phase of the recovery programme, which has to be focused on workforce redesign, making the best use of the entire workforce across health, social care and the voluntary sector, how that is positioned within the hierarchy of the organisation, and what is an executive function, and then what needs to be in partnership with trade unions and other partners, and what is the oversight mechanism. So I would caution against loading more into the remuneration committee, because that would complicate the statutory functions. So there may have to be a separation as part of the next phase of the governance review.
Thank you. And I can see Andrew would like to come in.
Yeah, I support that, Alison. I think that's really sensible, because I think if you look at our own staff base of 500 odd people, we've got some immense challenges that they face, don't they, in terms of the efficiency drive, restructure, relocation, and that can't be lost. I think it's really important we look at all the aspects around that, because it's pretty tough for our staff, and it's important we maintain that focus.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And Penny Smith.
Thank you. Agree with the separation, and we need to consider the workforce situation in context of the NHS long-term workforce plan, and I would recommend we think broader than NHS in Devon, not only for current transformation, but the future supply of our workforce is really significantly at risk. So the undergraduate numbers for student nurses are significantly down. We need targeted and a clear strategic approach to this.
Thank you. So with all those points in mind, can I ask you to approve the adoption of the refreshed terms of reference for the Remuneration and ICB Workforce Committee? Yes, thank you.
And then the final part of the report is presenting the policy for co-option to board committees. It's a policy that's appended to the report. Again, it was reviewed at the Remuneration Committee and recommended to the board for approval. So the board is asked to approve this.
Thank you. It was a very clear report. Any further comments on that? No? Thank you very much. We're going to come on now to the section of our report on the provider selection regime, and so it's over to Kirsty Denwood for this section of our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. I'll take the paper as read, but I'll just go through what the main parts of it are. So this is in anticipation of new rules regarding procurement for NHS, well, for healthcare services. The guidance is currently still in Parliament, so it is draft, but we're anticipating it to go through, and if it does, it will come into force on the 1st of January. It involves all organisations that procure healthcare services, NHS England, ICB trusts and local authorities where they procure public health. What it does is it gives a bit more flexibility to the current procurement policy, in which it's quite strict at the moment in terms of you have to compete all of your procurements, and you can't do direct awards unless there's special conditions. So what this now allows is for more flexibility, but it does still have the interests of patients and the taxpayer at heart. It's still robust, it still requires conflict of interest to be managed, and it's still a very transparent process. So there are 3 procurement options that you can now take. One is a direct award. The main difference here is that if there's only one capable provider, then you can do a direct award to that provider. You don't need to do a competitive process, which is a change from at present. Also, if you have a current incumbent providing a service and they're doing a good job and the service specification is not changing in any considerable way, then you can also do a direct award for that as well, rather than do a competitive process. The second element is what's called the most suitable provider. So where the direct award doesn't apply, you can go through a process of market engagement, but you don't have to go through the award in terms of a competitive tender. So there's still quite a bit of engagement involved. It still has a lot of criteria to be met around quality, value, etc. And there's still the standstill period. So whilst it sounds like it's a lighter process, it's actually still got quite a lot of stuff to do in there that's in line with the current policy. Then the competitive process, which is what we mainly have to do now, is very similar to the current process, but there's fewer legal obligations involved in it. So they're the main changes. If it comes into effect from 1st of January, any new procurements from the 1st of January will use this guidance. Any existing procurements will continue under the old guidance if they're already in place. What we're asking the board to agree is to set up a steering group so that we can make sure that we oversee the process and make sure that we're compliant with all of these new rules. And there's in terms of reference to all that steering group attached, with the chair being the ICB CFO. We would also need to amend the scheme of reservation and delegation to allow the chief exec to agree the arrangements for this compliance. And we will ultimately have to amend our procurement policy, so that will need refreshing and bringing back through the normal governance routes. The final thing that probably worth mentioning is if there's a requirement for appeals process. So if any supplier wants to appeal, we're considering about if we set this up system-wide, because it'll probably be easy to manage if you have parties from across the system, because it needs to be people that have not been involved in the original procurement. So it'll give us a wider set of people to go for and help manage that appeals process. So that's something that's being considered as well. So that's it in a nutshell. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. That was very clear. It looks like a welcome streamlining. But do any colleagues have questions? Yes, Sarah Lou.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it is very welcome. The steering group, just a request that the VCSE Assembly are included in that.
Okay, I'll take a note of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin Orford.
Thank you, and thanks, Kirsty, for a really clear report. So I just want to double check the governance arrangements, if I may, and just get some clarification on them. We're moving the delegation from the board. We're moving the responsibility for ensuring compliance from the board to the chief exec officer. Is that is that because that's best practice nationally, or is it something we've decided is pertinent to Devon?
So I think it's so we can allow the group to be set up so that he can to oversee the compliance of it. So okay. I don't know, Philippa, because I know she's been involved in the governance side of this, whether she can respond to that.
So thank you. So in my experience, the responsibility for ensuring compliance sits with the executive, and the responsibility for receiving assurance that that responsibility is being fulfilled sits with the board, which is why we're proposing that amendment. The other part of the amendment is to remove the approval of the ICB procurement policy, which again is one that we've proposed sits with the executive through the proposed policy on policies that came to the board in the previous meeting.
Okay, that's clear. I couldn't see in the paper where there would be the scrutiny of the decisions of the steering group. Would that go into the audit committee? Sorry. So I was looking for where is the scrutiny of the decisions of the steering group? Would that come into the audit committee?
Yes, that's the proposal. So essentially the proposal is that the steering group is established as a subgroup of the executive committee, which may make it's a little bit tricky around the VCSE membership, but we can have a conversation about the best way of ensuring that we get that input. And then assurance is provided through the executive committee to the audit and risk committee.
Okay, my final governance point, the appeals process, there's no non-executive director presence in that, and again, is that normal?
So we're very much in the process of trying to understand what that appeals process needs to look like, which is why the report hasn't gone into a lot of detail about it yet. So I don't think we're, I know we're not saying that that's not going to be the case, but we're looking to understand what the best way of fulfilling the requirements of the regime are likely to be. We know that we want to include that system view because that enables us to bring that wider perspective, and obviously bringing the decision making to executive level does free up our non-executives to be involved in that appeals process if appropriate, but we're not seeking to confirm what that process is yet, to give ourselves just a little bit more time to think through it.
Okay, thanks Philippa, thanks Kirsty.
Donna Manson.
My question is, what will be the training for the colleague staff involved in having this responsibility to be responsible for this type of work? And then secondly, what will be the programme of audit, independent audit, in terms of procurement on an annual basis, so that there's some oversight of what that looks like. We often focus a lot in public sector on the money we spend internally rather than the money externally, and also the link to outcomes and performance. So I'm just interested in what that kind of external view on will be to support the staff who are making these decisions, along with the training.
So I'll attempt to answer both questions, but Kirsty can jump in on the training in particular. So NHS England has been very proactive in leading training on the provider selection regime for all relevant authorities, ICBs and providers. This has been taking place over the past few months, and I know that the procurement, the contracting team will be an opportunity to review the way in which we're doing that as well.
Thank you. Kirsty, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, so there's been quite a large amount of training provided already by NHS England in preparation for this, and we're making sure all of our contracting team are fully trained. We've also did a session at the staff briefing the whole organisation on the introduction of this as well. So we are communicating the change. Obviously, when we get the change in the procurement policy as well, then that will go out to everybody as well. But there is training available, and those people who are key in the process have access to that training.
Thank you. So can I ask colleagues to note the establishment of the steering group and its terms of reference, and agree the proposed amendments to the NHS Devon scheme of reservation and delegation? Sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon, Sarah Lou.
Sorry, it's just what Kirsty said at the end there. Has access to that training. How do we monitor that they have actually access to the training if they are in this, if they are overseeing this new system working, please?
So I can go back to the team and ask for a log of the people that have been involved and those that haven't, that need to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that extra clarification, are we happy to proceed? Yes. Thank you. So we're going to come on now to the section of our meeting which is around governance, performance and assurance reports, and we're going to start with the board assurance framework, and this is back to Philippa.
Thank you. So the report presents to the board the board assurance framework, but I think most importantly it presents to the board a proposal that we take a different approach to our board assurance framework in the future. Again, building on the discussion and the reports that we've had today, the focus on our exit from NOF4 seems to be an appropriate focus for the BAF moving forward, to enable us to really ensure that we are managing the risk to the achievement of our strategic objectives. We had a discussion at our executive team meeting when we considered the BAF before we presented it to the board, and it felt that proposed approach would enable us to move forward and focus for the rest of this year on the things that really need oversight and assurance at the board and board assurance committees. Discuss the proposal with Graham as chair of Audit and Risk Committee and Kevin as chair of Finance and Performance Committee before presenting it to the board, and they were both supportive. I also discussed the proposal with our internal audit colleagues as well, in light of the potential impact that this might have on any internal audit opinion in relation to our risk management framework. And again, they were supportive of the proposal that we realign to our NOF4 exit criteria. So the BAF report as it's presented doesn't go into detail about what that will look like, because we wanted to get the board's approval before we did any further work on it. But subject to the board's approval, we will then take a reworked BAF focusing on our NOF4 exit criteria to the Audit and Risk Committee meeting on the 10th of January, which will enable us to bring back a refreshed BAF to the next public board meeting.
Thank you, Philippa. Does anybody have anything they would like to add? Franco Kelly.
Thank you, Philippa. I completely understand the need to refocus the BAF, but we've just had COP28, and we do need to think about what that means for us. And I know 16 years away for net zero seems like a long way, but it's probably as urgent as planning for the strikes over Christmas in terms of climate change. And the reason I think we should not lose things like this is if you're going for transformational change and you're thinking, how do we deliver care for 2040 that is net zero, you end up doing things very differently from what you might do if you're just planning for next year or the year after. So can we please keep that on the agenda as something that's really quite important for the transformational change as much as anything else?
Yeah, and I think you flagged something that I should have mentioned, which is anything that we don't take forward onto the refresh BAF, we will absolutely continue to review as part of our corporate risk register. So the intention is not just to lose what we've got there already, because we will need to review, but it's also obviously part of our joint forward plan. And as we're going through the refresh of our joint forward plan, we're aligning our work on risk much more carefully to that as well, so that we will definitely be able to reflect that going forward.
Thank you. Sarah Lou Devon.
Thanks, Chair. Oh. Thanks, Chair. I just want to highlight the increased risk in inequalities and prevention. I don't know if somebody would like to share some of the reasoning behind that. My question would be, where is that going to be moving forward? Because as we've talked about, although we need to come out of NOF4, it does need to be alongside the transformational changes. And I suppose there's a challenge for me as to is that being held true to our joint forward plan and the way that we're moving forward.
Thanks, Sarah Lou. So I think the increase in risk for the remainder of this year is reflected by both the financial challenge and the need to try and focus on some of those key areas around particularly urgent emergency care, but also elective recovery. And in the sort of the descriptors in the risk, what we're really welcoming is the commitment for the £3.7 million for that health inequalities prevention agenda into next year's business plan. And as I said, the work that Kirsty and colleagues are doing to help us with a different approach to how we do that business planning or operating planning for next year will help us. And also, of course, as I said to Sheena, you know, in the new CMO structure, the Director of Population Health, again, gives us an opportunity in the restructure to refocus and make sure we've got the team to deliver that. And one of the other reasons for the increase in the risk is that one of the bits of work that we've done through this year has been to try and reduce the number of people who were on very short-term contracts with us. And again, that's brought us a pinch point, if you like, in terms of some of the colleagues that we've had, you know, available to work on that agenda. So this I'm hoping very much will just be a blip, but it is only fair to reflect it in the risk at this point.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Judy Hargaden next, and then Sheena Asthana.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could make a slightly alternative proposal. I'm absolutely pro us focusing all our energy on the risks of NOF4, but it seems to me that we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that we actually did some quite sophisticated work on a model of considering our key risks and a way of assuring ourselves that progress is being made. And many of the issues in the NOF4 are actually included in the current BAF. There are specific areas. And rather than kind of rewrite a new document and dump the old one, could we consider...
Judy, unfortunately, we seem to have lost Judy at the crucial point. Yes. Right. Oh, we're just going to see if this is going to be a long delay. We might... 2 minutes. So we'll... yes, I think that the point, though, that I think Judy is developing is about actually, do we need to start from scratch, or can we keep this and have the NOF4 as an expanded section alongside it?
So I don't know whether Andrew wanted to come in on that.
It wasn't on that point, Sarah, but I do think, I mean, we can structure it differently, can't we? But we do need to refocus it around some of the priority areas. It's quite clear, areas like prevention. You know, there's an impression that work stopped. It hasn't, and it's an important area that we focus on. I was just going to mention the green bit to support Frank, Chair, if I may, because I think there's an awful lot of work that we need to do on that agenda. We currently don't resource it ourselves as an organisation. Darren and I do that as a part-time job. The trusts do a brilliant job around the green agenda, I think, largely around the estates work, where there's great opportunity to do green work. I think primary care is a massive challenge from the green agenda, as Frank will probably know. So we probably do need to think about that as part of the joint forward plan, because actually it can help us, can't it, with we might need to invest a slight bit of money, but it might actually reward us with lots of savings if we do it properly. So I think that's an area where we could probably work with our partners. You know, Donna's organisation have, you know, they have a climate emergency. I think there's a lot of potential to work across organisations because I think we're all trying to do the same things.
So I'll come back on the query about the structure. So I think to talk to the point that Judy was developing, the intention is absolutely not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a lot in the BAF that is relevant to the NOF4 exit criteria. However, my concern and the concern of the executive team is that the BAF is becoming quite a difficult document to engage with. And the importance of the BAF is having something that provides a structure to enable the board to identify its key risks and the actions that are being taken to manage those key risks. Mm-hmm. So the important thing is that we have a document that is relatively simple and is enables people to engage with it. So I would take that as a guiding principle for further work to be done on it.
Judy, we cut you off in your prime, but we could get a sense of the points you were trying to develop. But and Philippa and Andrew have responded about how these are not going to be lost. Because I absolutely agree. None of us want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Are you happy with that? Sheena, would you like to make a comment?
It's on a similar point because I can't understand. I mean, all of this business continues apace. So the work, presumably, even though it's been largely halted and under-resourced, the work on the population health remains there. There are other aspects which may disappear, for example, relating to primary care and mental health, if we were going to focus completely on NOF criteria. Now, for me, if I look at the kind of statements about our disinvestment into population health management, as far as I'm aware, that's about the first or the second time that has actually been shown to the board. And I really welcome the fact that the BAF has allowed us to raise that as an issue. If it's not included in a BAF that's shared, a more focused BAF, then that key issue and that key risk for us in terms of what I always keep on saying is not of something for the future. It has to be alongside. You know, these two things complement each other. I'm worried that goes away. It's not as if all of this work is not going to be happening. My second real concern about it is that, if I'm honest, there's real variation in the detail and quality of the different BAF sections. So some of them are fantastic, and others are not quite so detailed, and you're wondering what the strategy is. And I want reassurance that the strategy in those other areas is as good. I mean, Bill, yours are brilliant. They're absolutely fantastic, your sections. And I want all the sections to be that good. Now, that you may say that requires an awful lot of work, but if someone's in charge of a particular section, I would expect that work and the strategic thinking and the transparent thinking to be as good as Bill's is. So in other words, I'm worried that we're simply shuffling away kind of perhaps poor strategic thinking. We're shuffling away key issues that we're kicking, the ball over, but we actually have to be aware of them now. So I'm not particularly happy about this. I don't mind having a sort of separate, or you have it's in two parts. These are our absolute bad things, and then here are the rest of the risks. But I would really hesitate to get rid of them and just focus on a narrower set.
Well, Bill, you were first in class, and obviously the opportunity to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks very much, but they're all my sections, aren't they? Because I'm the interim chief executive, and we need to make sure that they're all at the same level. So I think there's two things here. One is the focus on NOF4 and reframing that, I think, is important, but we shouldn't lose the other elements that you've highlighted. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to level all of this up. So I take the points on board. We will ensure that the revised BAF takes those into account and that the detail that you've talked about is the same across the piece. And so I think there's further assurance and QA work for the exec to make sure that what we bring back actually addresses those concerns.
Donna Manson.
Yeah, and apologies if I'm not getting it right, but we've got failing children's services. We've had for a long time. And the word children and young people just not coming at me in this document at all. Now, I know lots of people have been involved in looking at that, considering that, but safeguarding is the #1 priority in this room, keeping our vulnerable children and adults safe. And to me, that should be flashing red in this document, and I'm struggling to find it. The trajectory of spend and challenges, the waiting lists, and children and young people, mental health and well-being, and those children become adults. So to me, there's just a simple imbalance in this report. It sees families as families and sees that pathway. We talk about pathways of acute care and so on and so forth, but if we're going to redesign, so I think there's a fundamental conceptual challenge in this document that I know, Sarah, you led fantastically a number of months ago, that whole discussion, remember it months ago, about our plan. So I'm just a bit concerned that we get these big structures for planning, but there's a time and a place for saying we need to change some of this. And I think for me to accept this today doesn't show in any way the extensive work that people are doing to change their approach. So even I'm seeing things about acute care and so on, but if we don't get our transitions right for our most vulnerable children into adult services, and I'm not even seeing the word transition there, so I think there's a lack of concepts and higher up strategies that we need to lift up. Look at our transitions, that's where things often go wrong for our families. So we want to talk about prevention and redesign, but we've got a burning platform of safeguarding and risk at this moment in time that is taking place in all the discussions that we're having. So I think we need to have some narrative to say that it might not be in this report just now, but there is extensive work that is recognised as issue and we're all working on it day by day. So I'm happy if it's as a context or a narrative set out, but you know, Ofsted are coming to assess our front door in March and we know it's not working well enough just now. That's a fact, and our waiting list and send. So I think it's really important that somewhere we get that located, because it's maybe not there yet as a piece of work. And there was just a meeting last night about a new KPI system for children and young people in Plymouth, Torby and Devon, which is fantastically led by Alison and others in the room. So I'd like to see that narrative located somewhere, because I think it's so important.
Thank you, Donna. That's such an important point. Philippa, are you going to respond on that one?
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely, and I think I can provide a reassurance that that is in the risk register. So what we need to do is flag where there are risks that we haven't necessarily captured in the BAF, but that we're also focusing on, and obviously we'll pick that out through the work of the integrated care partnership as well, and focus on that so we can make sure that that's in the narrative going forward. Yeah.
Can I, though, just bring Bill in? Because I think there is a point about how it looks if actually it's not then in the board assurance framework as well. Is there a danger that we lose board focus on it for that reason? So I think we do need to think very carefully about this. Bill?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree, and I think Donna's point's well made, and we will ensure that we address that. So whether that's in the board assurance framework or whether that's in the way that she said in terms of the context and the narrative, we have to do that. What we shouldn't lose sight of, as we've said, is that our focus is on not for exit and the statutory requirements that we have to look at, and quite clearly safeguarding and the position on children's services is something that needs to be included there. So points well made. We'll make sure that it's revised to include that.
Thank you. So shall we put that on the action list so that we are reporting back on the progress of that? Sarah Lou.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So my question is, one of the things that Donna's just raised is about transitions for children and people. There is a piece of work happening at the moment in a prevention work stream that feeds into the board through the governance process. ICB are no longer supporting the input to that work stream. So how do we ensure that the reporting continues to happen? Because obviously it's still part of the system, and I think it's a very important part of the system, and it sadly is something that that I think shows how it's a piece of work that shows how system working and prevention can work alongside something that we're aiming to achieve in safeguarding effectively NOFOR. So I'm sure there's other pieces of work like that are happening. So how are we going to ensure that we see how that is actually effective moving forward?
And I'm going to ask Nigel Aitchison to respond to that point.
Thanks, both to Donna and Sarah Lee. So As you both know, the approach subsequent to the risks that we've got in that agenda have prompted a whole new approach, and our restructuring, much as it's very, very painful in a number of ways, is also an opportunity. And one of the biggest opportunities is to refresh and refocus, not just as the ICB, but working with system partners, how we really build a structure and a team and an approach to that whole children and young people's agenda. And so I was really pleased that you raised that in terms of the risk, because certainly for us, that's one of the absolutely fundamental opportunities in the restructure. And whilst we recognise that it's an opportunity, it's difficult because we think we need to bolster both the safeguarding approach and the broader children and young people's agenda. At our exec team meeting yesterday, we talked about the long waits, and so this is a really central part of what we want to do. So I very much hope that that will become visible, or more visible, and perhaps what we need to do is bring back that approach to give that assurance to colleagues around this table as we finalise that structure.
Thank you. So looking at what we're being asked to do as a board today, which is to approve the changes, it strikes me that we have a little bit more work to do to get it to a place where everyone's happy to fully sign it off. But are we content that with the comments that have been made today that the work continues? And I'm just wondering whether there's a facility then for us to delegate authority for one of our committees to approve it, or does it have to come back to a full public board?
So I suggest, as proposed, we take it to the Audit and Risk Committee, which has the responsibility for providing assurance to the board in relation to the operation of the risk management systems and frameworks within the organisation. However, we have an opportunity at a board development session in January to have a further discussion around risk and risk appetite, which might be helpful to feed into that as well.
Are colleagues content that we take that approach? So, Donna.
If it can be noted that it's linked to that North piece, that safeguarding piece, and there was fantastic narrative that came out there, and that to exit, you need that in place. So I just think we've got to make sure in everything we do that the word safeguarding is becoming more and more in our reports. So if it's noted in some way, I'll be content with that, and the process you've described. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah Lou had made some very specific queries, and I'm just wondering if we could put as an action that we could have correspondence back to the board to answer those questions. Thank you very much, Sarah Lou. Right. At this point, I think we're going to move on to the Integrated Quality Performance and Finance Report. And Anthony Fitzgerald, thank you for leading on this.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm taking report as read, all 100 and something pages of it. A couple of things I need to raise, and I think people will have noticed that we have taken on board comments from this board and from other groups relating to our executive summary. We have tried to strengthen that to throw light on some of the other areas of performance, some of which have just been mentioned in terms of children and young people, but also mental health. We do have a tendency to focus on elective care and urgent and emergency care, and we wanted to make sure that this document was casting a light on all areas of quality performance and also finance as well. That being said, we recognise that the quality elements need a little bit more work, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with Penny on what that could look like going forward, bearing in mind some of the risk elements that have been highlighted earlier in this meeting. A couple of things to raise in terms of the report itself, which obviously we must bear in mind is written in a point in time, and things progress significantly since then. In terms of our 104-week wait trajectory and elimination of by the end of November, we actually missed that by 2 patients. One was patient choice, and the other was delays with importing a prosthesis. So we almost made that. It's also worth bearing in mind that actually we would be on course with all elective trajectories if it hadn't been for the prolonged periods of industrial action as well. We will now be reforecasting based on what we know over the next few weeks in terms of industrial action to make sure that we have the right level of assurance relating to that. We discussed urgent and emergency care at length, I think, in terms of this conversation, but in terms of this report, what we want to try and do is strengthen the links with both mental health elements, which obviously are described, but also children and young people. It is also worth mentioning primary and community care in terms of the metrics that are currently within the report itself, but we are also conscious that primary care we need to increase both awareness of current system pressures, but also some of the great work that is being done to improve overall access for that particular domain. I'll leave Kirsty and Bill to talk about finance and workforce within this or subsequent reports, but I'm happy to take any questions regarding the content of this particular report.
Well, thank you. It certainly has been some very welcome changes, and particularly with the summary page, which is very useful. Thank you very much. And so, Bill, I see you would like to come in as well. Bill Shields.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. It was really just the point that Anthony made in terms of the 104-week waits. We had a long conversation about this in the executive and are really clear that going forward we need to man-mark the position as we get down to patients in single figures. So if there is an issue about prosthesis needing to be imported as the case, then we need to think about how we actually deal with that rather than after the fact. So we will look at a much more proactive approach as we get down to 104-week waits and then sustain that position. In terms of finance, and Kirsty can speak to that, there are 2 detailed finance reports later on the agenda. So whether the board would like to deal with that now or later in the agenda, I'm happy for that to be done in either way.
I think we'll take it later in the agenda rather than risk duplication, if that's all right. So, Donna.
Yeah, can I ask, I'm looking at the children and young people, I know we're building a KPI framework around about that, but can I ask in terms of our immediate duties as corporate parents, somewhere in terms of our performance we consider our responsibilities in terms of benchmarking across other ICB systems, what the commitment is to care leavers and children in care. You know, we've got 900 young people in care in Devon, and in some parts of England that entitles them to access to mental health provision for their parents if they're subject to addiction or whatever. So can I ask that it's not currently there, and I know we're building a framework, but our duties as corporate parents are set out in legislation, and I would ask it somewhere that is taken away to be considered as part of our care leavers focus, which is subject to full inspection within 2024, and it would be good if we could take that away and get that addressed urgently, please.
Thank you. Anthony, did you want to come back on that point?
I'm happy to work with colleagues and look at that, whether it forms part of this report or actually supplementary information. I'm not quite sure, but I think we will take that away and come back with a response.
Thank you. So could we add that to the action list that we'll report back on that? Thank you. I'm very conscious that time is now very short, so can I ask colleagues to keep questions really brief? Sheena, can I, you're on my list, thank you. Please come in.
Yes. What freedom do we have to choose our indicators? Because when we are, to use Donna's phrase, on a burning platform and have very, very little resource, I'm conscious that we're chasing nationally defined indicators for prioritising services that may not actually remain a priority anymore, given our financial situation. So here, I would personally rather focus my mental health resources on children and people who've experienced trauma rather than rolling out IAPT, or at least moving towards a digital IAPT offer, because of concerns about the relative effectiveness of those talking therapies. You know, in terms of, you know, I mean, I know that is a national mandate, but at what point do we say, well, we've got huge waiting lists for people who we know we should be getting in early. We're trying to chase a target that might not be as important as the getting in early bit. Can we be flexible around this? Or at least evaluate the evidence?
Anthony.
Short answer, an awful lot of this is nationally mandated, Sheena, and therefore we have to respond to those elements that are nationally mandated. There's obviously a large element that we can look at. I think it's about choosing what we do and we don't do. In terms of the report itself, it forms part of the operating framework, and actually therefore we have to respond against the majority of metrics that are in this report.
Thank you. And James McInnes.
I'm going to be brief, and I'm not going to get the answer today, but I've been sitting here through the meeting actually and thinking, and this report particularly, you know, a key partner is sort of adult social care. in all this, and yet it's not actually, unless I've missed it, I do apologise if I've missed it, but should there be a narrative there, collective narrative of the three authorities within the ICB area of the challenges and the performance of adult social care? Because they're very much part of the whole picture and they ought to be in there, surely.
Anthony, would you like to pick on that?
I think it's a really good point, actually, because it does tend to be very health dominated, and we are an ICS. That being said, this responds to nationally prescribed operating framework for the NHS. I think there is something about the transparency of social care information, and also the wealth of reports that you have to generate and deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure whether that's part of this report. Probably should be, actually, in many ways. That being said, there's certainly a gap in terms of the information we're receiving as a board, and perhaps that's what we ought to look at in the first instance and then think about how we integrate it afterwards.
Could I just come back and say thank you very much for that? I think it's very important we have to follow what national guidance is, absolutely, but if we are an integrated care board, we need something about which is quite a large part of the picture that currently is missing.
Thank you. I can see Alison Williams would like to come in.
I wouldn't disagree with anything that was said. I think what will be important is to make the distinction between the statutory accountabilities of the board and what is in the performance report, and then the wider system performance. So I think they're both equally valid, but they may need to be done in different ways, because there is a statutory accountability for certain things, and then there's a wider partnership role in others. So I doubt it would be part of the same report, Anthony, but there is a real legitimacy in bringing that into the debate about service improvement.
So it seems to me that we need to have a further discussion about how we're going to take that forward, because obviously the next point here is I'm asking the board to take assurance from the current performance, and as you say, there are aspects of that we wouldn't be statutorily responsible for, but really important to our being able to achieve our aims as a system. So I think we'll need to bring this back for further discussion. Right, so at that point, so asking you to take assurance from the current performance position, clearly we're not there yet in a number of parameters. Clearly there's been improvements in the elective performance, particularly for long waiters, and that's been really important. So very, huge thanks to everyone who's made that happen. But with that caveat that we're not there yet, we've heard in detail the plans that are in place to improve performance. So can I ask for your agreement on that point? Yep. Thank you. Right, we're going to come now on to the committee chairs' reports, and we're going to start with the Finance and Performance Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. There are two reports in the board pack which relate to the meetings of the 31st of October and the 28th of November. There were no escalations to the board from either committee. I'll take both reports as read, but just a couple of things to highlight to the board in the detail of those reports. The first one is that at the request of the board, the committee undertook a detailed review and scrutiny of the proposed revisions to the annual plan which have been submitted to NHS England. We took assurance relating to the process that had been followed in the development of those revisions, but we had only limited assurance about some of the actions to address the risks to the achievement of the new proposed plan. So the committee will do a deep dive into those risks at its meeting in the middle of December. We'll be particularly looking at workforce controls, cost improvement programmes, and the drug costs elements of those risks. And the second point to highlight is that we reviewed the proposal for the surrender of some of the voided ward and corridor space at Oakhampton Hospital. We assessed that proposal against the criteria set by the board, and we agreed that an application for surrender should be made to NHS Property Services. Happy to take any other questions about the meetings.
Thank you. Do colleagues have any questions for Kevin? No. Thank you very much, Kevin. We're going to come on now to the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, and we've got two of those, the 18th of October and the 15th of November. And so thank you very much, Hisham.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take both reports as read. There were a couple of escalations. I think there's just some background noise there, but I just wanted to point out something in relation to the quality reporting. We discussed in the committee the change in the quality indices reporting. We've touched on an aspect of it which relates to harm, and we believe that there is a need for real-time reporting of harm because, as been discussed earlier, this is not reflected in what we see from impact of delays in urgent and emergency care. So that's one, and obviously there are other elements that need to be developed as well that we started the journey of, and that relates to the outcomes, for example, outcomes of cancer care, which have not been reported before. Mortality is being reported at the moment, and that hadn't been reported for quite a while. In terms of the escalations, they relate to two issues. One is the capacity of the patient safety team to deal with the increasing number of complaints due to pods being now commissioned through NHS Devon, and they also in terms of patient complaints due to access in general. So both of these we believe impact on patients' experience, but also impact on patient safety in a way, because there isn't the capacity to deal with the complaints, and that's been ongoing for quite a few months. The other issue also relates to capacity, but is in relation to infection prevention and control, and very specifically in relation to tuberculosis and the possible outbreaks. We discussed this, and actually since our discussions there has been a patient with tuberculosis, and there were issues about uncertainty rather about the funding streams, and those were the two areas that we wanted to escalate to the board so that they are first of all aware of those issues, and then the support about the capacity issues as well. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Penny Smith in here. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you, Chair. It's really important for us to hear those messages around capacity, and obviously as part of my due diligence I will be working with the team to see where those capacity risks are. I think there's certainly opportunity to do some things differently, and we need to work increasingly in partnership with our providers to really think about what's the critical mass of staff working in the quality field, but we need to be cited obviously on our statutory obligations, and to that end I have met with the head of IPC already, and we have thought about some different ways of working, perhaps cross boundaries. The other thing I would want to say that there's a sort of notable absence in the reports, and that's not by way of criticism, but we are in financial recovery, and we do need to really think about the quality impact of our financial recovery plan. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be making difficult decisions, but we need to be making transparent, informed decisions, because they're hard decisions. And there will be opportunity in that different way of working as well. But I think there's an opportunity now for us to work with the system quality and performance group, because this ultimately is within provider as well as the wider system, for us to do some joined up work. So I really do want to make that point clear at board, that this is a piece of work that will be undertaken.
Thank you. So you'll be committing to bring that back so we could put that as an action, that we can agree the exact wording with you.
Chair, sorry, and that's not to insinuate that that work hasn't been undertaken. It's the fact that I think we need to make sure it's properly governed.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Hisham, for escalating those. Oh, I beg your pardon, Sarah Lou Glover.
Just a couple of things. One, I note that there's an increase in self-harm in patients, so I'd just ask what is happening about that at a system level. And then secondly, I know there's transition in the new reporting from pitch reports. What's the comms that will be going out around that, please?
Thank you. Penny, are you going to...
like me?
I beg your pardon? Sorry, Hisham, were you wanting to respond on that?
Well, just really about the pitch, there is a transition and there is a system-wide communication. We've been assured by Russell Cook that this is already in place, and you will find that the pitch reporting is decreasing every month because of the shift to the new system as well, the LEPSIP, and so there has been a communication with the system according to Russell. In relation to the self-harm, this is something that we've picked up on more than one occasion. It is a little bit more reported with one particular provider, but is also across the patch. And there is a request, this may be something that will be picked up now with our new Deputy Chief Executive as Chief Nursing Officer, because this is something that we have picked up before, and Susan was going to look into that before stepping down.
Penny, is that something that you're going to be taking over the work? Thank you very much. Right, we're going to come on now to the, just to note that and also take assurance from the committee chair's reports. Thank you. Then we're coming on to the Primary Care Commissioning Transition Committee, and we have two meetings, the 5th and the, no, 3, sorry, I beg your pardon, the 5th, the 12th and the 9th of November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will take the reports as read. There are two things I would like to highlight and one issue then that we wanted to raise with the board. The historic underperformance in dental has left us with some real serious issues in dental. I have said this before. We are short of capacity to do anything about it, but the long-run impact of these is that people are getting very serious oral health issues that lead kids to having, you know, general anaesthetics in the acute sector and adults to having issues that would never have been seen 30 years ago. So we just really need to tackle that area. Secondly, we are seeing signs of pressure in the primary care system. We have one practice where they have handed back the contract, where they have not been able to recruit GPs. And so that and some quality issues we've seen in some of the practices. So again, I would just ask people to be alert to the pressure in the system. The issue we decided at the meeting to escalate to the board was a real concern about yet further delays in approving the Teignmouth Primary Care Health Centre. This has been getting on for 10 years. The extended decision-making around NHS estates and some of the complexity, particularly when it comes to primary care, has caused just massive problems for these two practices that want to come in there. And as I understand it, we still don't have a conclusion on the way forward for this. And the committee was very concerned about this.
Thank you very much, Judy. I think this is deeply troubling. Do we have any of the exec team able to follow up on where we're going to go with this? Andrew?
Yeah, it could be Nigel or I, but I'll say a little bit. So we are bringing a paper to the next decision-making exec team meeting around the options. There are some challenges clearly around finances. I know that Sir Richard and Liz are also going to provide us with some up-to-date information from their organisation. But we're really clear. I think we will, whatever happens, we've got to sort out primary care in Teignmouth. If you look at the state of the facilities they've got there, it is absolutely awful. So I think we're really clear that we need to find a solution, and we'll work that through with Liz and colleagues as well as my own team, and Joe is leading on that work within our organisation.
Thank you. And although it came too late to be, for much consideration deeply to be included in the board papers, with regard to the handback in Linton, could you update the board with what the next steps are going to be with that? Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. The update is that we've got 6 interested parties that we're engaged with at the minute in order to meet that need. Our team have met with the Mayor of Linton last week to update the local council on the potential options for that. So as soon as we've got more information on what the final solution to that will be, we will obviously share that. But it's encouraging that we've got, as I say, 6 interested parties at the minute in that discussion.
Thank you. And then the final point from me, following on from Judy's report, is the issue of dentistry. I know Frank O'Kelly, myself and Joe Turl attended the regional meeting on this, and I do feel that it's deeply troubling that we don't have anybody within our team who is leading on such an important area of concern to our communities. And I just wonder if there could be any further update to us, because yes, thank you.
Many thanks. So we are hoping within the next week to resolve that and identify a colleague who can take as a specific area of portfolio the dental work forward, particularly a business case that we're working up, and it links to what Donna said earlier on about the looked after children group, for whom we're building. Well, we've got a business case that we're going to bring to try and use some of the dental underspend to meet the needs of those looked after children, recognising that as part of that broader piece of work we talked about children and young people together.
Thank you, and sorry, I don't want to take over the questioning, but actually some assurance to the board about what is happening, the work that's going on to liaise with the Plymouth system, and also the wider work that we're doing for the most underserved and disadvantaged communities across Devon. Thank you.
So one of the areas that we are, as you know, involved in is that work with Plymouth, and the colleague who we're hoping to identify next week will pick that up together with Joe Turl, who's been leading on that so far. In terms of the broader piece of work, that is something that we will have to work up, and we are talking not just in our system with the Dental Hub, but with other ICBs who are facing this similar issue about how we use the opportunity in an ICB to refocus some of that NHS-funded dental activity on those most vulnerable and most in need in our system. But that is a longer-term piece of work, recognising, as I know you do through those meetings, some of the complexity about how we recycle and reuse some of that dental underspend as we take not just the accountability, but also some of the ability, if you like, to build a team to do that work. Because at the moment we're in a transition phase where the hub approach shared by ICBs has limitations in its capacity to take some of that work forward, but recognising the priority that you described.
Thank you for that. And I can see lots of people wanting to come in, Judy and Bill and Hisham. So I'm not sure, Bill, do you want to come in at the end? Shall we take the points from Judy?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I just wanted to be very clear that I wasn't criticising any individuals in our organisation when I was making these reports. And I think there is a very big lesson for us to learn about delegated commissioning from NHSE, because what happens when something becomes local and you start getting local scrutiny committees able to discuss it with us, and we start to be able to have more influence, because before we couldn't, the gaps in the system really show up a great deal more. And as Nigel says, the level of staffing that are working across the region to support pharmaceutical, optical and dental commissioning remains exactly the same. But the expectations and the quality reviews, the complaints that are coming through that Hisham referred to in his report on quality, suddenly all create a whole kind of momentum and a recognition. I mean, dental is where the biggest issues are, but there are quite a few issues in pharmaceutical too, as you will have seen in the reports. But this will apply when we get specialised commissioning delegated as well, I think. So worth learning some lessons from that. And I'm glad that Andrew and colleagues are working on the Teignmouth issue. Andrew, I think there are two issues. One is how we resolve the current one, but the second one is how we do our estate strategy going forward. And we need a good discussion about that at the board, because these things just go round in rather tortuous circles. Again, not our fault, not for want of trying, but because of some of the systems we're operating within.
Thank you for that. Hisham.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I think there has been an invitation from PDSE, which is the first of its kind in the UK as a social enterprise for dentistry. They won't have all the answers. There's been an invitation for colleagues from NHS Devon to visit and engage with them. This is the social enterprise element of the Peninsula Dental School. And they have innovative ideas of how to address at least part of the very significant problems we have in dentistry in the region. And these do not relate just to dentists, but to using the multidisciplinary team to address the issues that we have. So I think it's really important to continue that engagement because I think it will have a significant impact on at least part of the problem.
Thank you, and I know that engagement is ongoing. I'm keen to bring Bill in, but Sheena, did you have a final extra point you wanted to add beforehand? No, it was a historic hand. Right, here we are. So, Bill.
Thanks, Chair. So a couple of things. One is it is an issue for the executive to resolve the leadership within the organisation, and we will take that as something that has to be expedited. So absolutely as an action from the discussion. In terms of the hub, that's something that I've escalated to NHS England, and that's a discussion that we'll do with them, because I know we've had that conversation, Sarah, you and myself, and I think that the current position is unsatisfactory. Whether it's something that we're doing in collaboration with other ICBs or not, it's unsatisfactory, and we need to be in a position where we can get a clear understanding of the resolution of this going forward. To Judy's point in terms of our estate strategy, I think that's absolutely right. But the reason I think that and I understand the point about not wishing to be critical, but we haven't done these things in a very good way in the past. You know, some of these developments are quite piecemeal, and it's why I think we're in the position that we're in. So we have to have a much more appropriate and comprehensive approach to our estates going forward, and that's something that we will be doing and bring forward through the appropriate subcommittees and to the board.
Thank you.
So I think Donna would like to come in. Thank you, Donna.
Just in terms of, for inspection purposes in children's services, and KPIs and health assessments and dentistry, my question is, how do we as a board know that we're engaging with children in care as to find creative solutions to this? As a resident in Devon, I've not had any issues in accessing a dentist and can do every day, any time. So I base that on what I expect from me, I would expect from my children. As a corporate parent, I would expect the same. It's a bit like the challenge of care leaver accommodation. So I think there's a question we have to ask ourselves today is, but how are we professionally taking on this challenge? Our young people themselves and their children in care families or foster families are likely to have much more creative solutions, but there's also the bit about how we tap the moral conscience of our communities in Devon to see this as something that we need their help to resolve. So I just think because it's such a chronic issue that I know as chief executives across Torby, Plymouth and Devon we're really worried about, and I know a number of people in the conversation, I just ask that we note to take, because it's come up as a performance issue, this away somewhere where we actually think about how we engage, because I know that my own organisation, our Devon County Council, has learned a lot as a senior team by listening to young people in front of us and saying it as it is, but also there is a bit there about how the voice of those young people into the dentists that we have in Devon may have an impact in a different way. So I think we have to really consider how we're addressing this issue. And sometimes we look to benchmark out with Devon to see this is not the same level of problem elsewhere for children in care in England. So we know we've got a specific issue here. So there is something about maybe benchmarking out what's not going to help us, but how we actually engaging direct with people. Because I think the public would be quite horrified, and we as corporate parents should be, that we've got children in this situation. So it's a really important thing about how we as a board begin to think about how we resolve some of these matters.
Thank you, and I think that's maybe something that when our new person in post starts, they could liaise with you about. Now, I'm very conscious of time at this point, so as we are overrunning, so can I just ask that at this point that we note and thank Judy for the escalations, and that we take assurance from those reports and look forward to hearing the updates. Thank you. So we're now going to come to the Remuneration and Internal Integrated Care Board Workforce Committee, and Kevin Orford. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. There are two reports in the pack relating to the meetings of the 14th of September and the 30th of October. I'll take them as read. Just two things that I want to say about those meetings. The first one is that you'll see there's been an awful lot of focus on the first phase of the ICB organisation restructure. There's been an extraordinary amount of work that's been necessary on this from the ICB executive and the teams. So I just want to note my personal thanks for everything that's, all the work that's been going on that, and also to thank the Remuneration Committee members for their additional work to ensure that all of that runs smoothly. And then the second thing is just an information point that's in the second report, that with the agreement of the Audit Committee, we've decided that the Freedom to Speak Up reports will now be considered in the Audit Committee rather than the Remuneration Committee. But I will still remain the board non-exec champion for Freedom to Speak Up and the non-exec link to the Freedom to Speak Up team. Happy to answer any questions about the reports.
Thank you, Kevin, for staying on as our lead for Freedom to Speak Up. And can I ask colleagues if there are any questions, or are we happy to note that point and take assurance from the committee's report? Yep. Thank you very much. So moving on, we come on to the finance reports, and thank you for the clear reports which we'll take as read. Are there any questions to Kirsty or to Bill around those finance reports? No. And is there anything you would like to add, Kirsty? Sorry.
Sorry, if I can just say something by way of context. So the board members will be aware that we've been in discussion with NHS England now for some time. They'll also be aware, by looking at the finance reports, that while our forecast is £42.3 million deficit, and remains so, that we are significantly off plan against that position as at month 7. There's been a significant amount of work that's been done locally, regionally and nationally to determine how we continue to deliver that position. We know that our cost improvement programme is back-ended, and we've been looking at the mitigations that we can put in place to deliver against that position. The board will also recall that there's a very detailed protocol that we have to go through if, as an organisation, we are reforecasting our position, and we're not in that position at this time. We remain in constant dialogue with NHS England regionally and nationally, and in fact have a conversation with the Regional Director of Finance later today in terms of our position. But we are, at this point, continuing to forecast that we will deliver that position, and I just want the board to be absolutely clear about that. It is one that's very risky. There are, however, a number of significant mitigations that we're putting in place to get as close as we possibly can to that position, but that is the current position at this time, and that remains our forecast.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Bill? Yes, Donna Manson.
Bill, I'm confused by paragraph 6 and paragraph 8. I wonder if you just provide an explanation. I'm just confused by it in terms of month 6, 0 variance, and then line 8, which I just wonder if you could explain that. the difference between the two.
So, I don't know, Kirsty, do you want to just address that one?
Is that in the ICB or the ICS report?
In the finance report, page 254. Sorry if I'm on the wrong finance report.
No, yeah, there's two reports, that's fine.
I just find that confusing, sorry, Chair. What it's saying.
So it was, sorry, paragraphs?
It's 6, introduction and background, number 6, talks about month 6 position, and then line or paragraph 8.
So the brackets is in month 6, so that's saying at month 6 the variance was 0. So it's comparing, so it's showing you what a movement is from the current month, month 7, to the previous month. Is it the bit that's in brackets?
Yeah, it's then going on to line 8 where it talks about the improved position. I'm just some clarification around it would be helpful. I find it confusing. Maybe it's just me.
Okay. No, I'll have a look at that and see how we can reword that for next time. That'd be helpful.
I think one of them's talking about the actual position and the other's talking about the risks, Donna.
Yeah, that leads to my question about
the risk.
Yeah, that leads to my question about are they risks or pressures? It's an interesting question, isn't it?
Well, one of the things that we are doing with providers, and we had a whole day session this week, was to be really clear about that precise point. Are they risks or are they pressures? So in terms of how we are assured, we have had to have much more detailed conversations with NHS providers than we have done as an ICB up until this point in time. Steve Webster, as the Financial Improvement Director, is working very closely with providers, CFOs and provider finance teams, and we are digging into their financial positions in a way that as an ICB we haven't done before. And that's because traditionally that has not been the role of an integrated care board, but very clearly it is now. And the expectation placed on us by NHS England regionally and particularly nationally is that that's what we do. So we're underway in terms of understanding all of those risks. That has allowed us to be much clearer about the position between now and the year end, and to also understand the delivery of cost improvement and the fact that it's back-ended. So that there is a mixture from providers, I think, of risks and pressures, but a lot of those risks I think will come to pass, and that's why we've also identified a significant number of mitigations to make sure that we continue to get as close as possible to the outcome.
That's very helpful. I just think sometimes it's good in terms of putting pressure on the system that we separate those things out, Bill. You know, what's a risk and what's a pressure? Because often people conflate the two. So I think that's really helpful clarification. I know you're working hard on that, but if there's anything we can do to help you to understand that, then it would be helpful.
Well, thank you very much, Donna. Great. So we're asked to note those finance reports. Thank you very much, colleagues. And then we come to the final area of this meeting, which is the action register. And I'm not proposing to go through these line by line, but to ask for you to have taken them as read and for us to agree that we complete the items that are for completion. There is one item still in progress, and that's an item that came out of a citizen story that we had at this board where there was a commitment to review orthopaedic pathways as a result. And I don't know, Anthony, whether you want to make any comments on that one, because that's the only one that's still open.
Certainly, yes. So the work is ongoing. It was delayed, and that's partly because of the work we were doing in terms of overall elective recovery. That being said, it's a really important part, and I think we heard some good messages in the board around some of the churn in terms of referral pathways. That will be coming back through our elective board in January. It was delayed owing to having to prioritise other elements of the elective pathway, but it certainly hasn't been forgotten about.
Understood, and thank you for that clarification. So I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. I don't think we have any other questions, do we, from members of the public? No. Are there any other business that colleagues would like to raise? No, in that case, thank you so much, everyone, and season's greetings, and see you back. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.